Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. When you've lost everything you thought mattered, that's when life shows you what truly does. Ezra Miller learned this at 73, 6 months after burying his wife Sarah. The Amish widower bought a flooded farmhouse for $100, expecting only broken walls and muddy floors. He wanted a quiet place to spend his remaining years alone. But when he walked through that front door, he found a young family, living in the upper rooms. They had lost their home in the flood and had nowhere else to go. Their 8-year-old daughter clutched a worn doll, while their German shepherd stood guard over what little they had left. The town had forgotten them. But Ezra couldn't walk away. What started as a man seeking solitude became something neither he nor this desperate family could have imagined. How do strangers become family when the world has washed away everything else? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the steady drip of water somewhere in the damaged walls. Ezra Miller stood in the doorway of what had been advertised as an empty farmhouse, his weathered hands gripping the deed that had cost him $100 and the last of his courage to start over. The young man rose first, his work clothes still damp from the floodwater that had receded just enough to make the lower floor passable. Behind him, a woman clutched a little girl close, and at their feet a German shepherd's amber eyes tracked Ezra's every movement with the wariness of a creature that had learned not to trust easily. "Sir, the man began, his voice carrying the weight of apology and desperation in equal measure. Ezra raised a gentle hand. In 45 years of marriage to Sarah, he had learned that sometimes the most important conversations began with silence, not words. The wedding ring he now wore on a thin gold chain beneath his plain shirt seemed to grow heavier against his chest. "I am Ezra Miller," he said simply, the way his people had always introduced themselves, with their name and nothing more, letting their actions speak for their character. "Tom Brennan," the man replied, extending a calloused hand that spoke of honest work. "This is my wife Maria and our daughter Lucy. We didn't know, the county never said anyone had bought the place." Maria stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and worry. "We're so sorry, Mr. Miller. We had nowhere else to go when the flood came. Our rental house downstream was completely destroyed, and the shelter in town was full. We thought this place was abandoned." Lucy peered out from behind her mother's worn skirt, her 8-year-old curiosity stronger than her shyness. Her blonde hair caught what little light filtered through the water-stained windows, and in her small hands she clutched a doll that had seen better days. The German shepherd, Rex, positioned himself protectively between the child and this stranger. In black clothes and a broad-brimmed hat, Ezra's chest tightened with a familiar ache. He and Sarah had never been blessed with children, though they had prayed for them through decades of marriage. The Lord's ways were not always clear, but looking at this little girl now, he wondered if perhaps some prayers were answered in unexpected ways. "How long have you been here?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. 3 weeks, Tom admitted, his jaw tightening with the shame of it. "We kept thinking someone would come, that we'd have to move on. We've been looking for somewhere else. But there isn't anywhere else," Maria finished quietly. "Not that we can afford." Ezra walked slowly through the main room, his boots echoing on the damp wooden floors. The house was older than he had expected, built sometime in the 1920s, when farms in this part of Ohio still prospered. The bones were good, solid oak beams and stone foundation, but the flesh had suffered. Water lines marked the walls 3 feet high, and the smell of damp wood and mildew hung heavy in the air. "The flood was the worst in 50 years, Tom continued, following Ezra's examination of the damage. "The creek jumped its banks in April, and the whole valley went under. Lost my job at the grain mill. It's completely gone. Maria was working at the dress shop in town, but it closed after the flood damaged most of the inventory. Lucy had crept closer during their conversation, her blue eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that only children possess. "Are you a real cowboy?" she whispered, staring at Ezra's broad hat. Despite everything, Ezra felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "No, child, I am Amish. We are farmers, not cowboys." "What's Amish?" Lucy asked with the directness of the very young. "Lucy," Maria chided gently, but Ezra waved her concern away. "We are people who live simply," he explained to the girl. "We believe in hard work, helping our neighbors, and trusting in God's plan for us." "Did God plan for you to buy our house?" Lucy asked, and the innocent question struck Ezra like a physical blow. Before he could answer, Maria stepped forward, pulling a water-damaged leather book from a small pile of salvaged belongings. "Mr. Miller, we want you to know we're God-fearing people too. This is our family Bible. It got wet in the flood, but we saved what we could." Ezra accepted the Bible with the reverence it deserved, running his fingers over the warped leather cover. The pages were wrinkled and stained, but the words were still readable. In the front cover, someone had written in careful script, "The Brennan Family Bible, established 1998. Thomas and Maria, married in Christ's love. 15 years, he said softly. "Yes, sir," Tom replied. "We met in church, married young. Lucy came along 2 years later, and we thought we had our whole lives figured out." His voice caught slightly. "Then the flood took it all." Ezra handed the Bible back to Maria, noting how her hands trembled as she received it. "Where is your church family? Surely they would—" "We moved here from Indiana 2 years ago for Tom's job," Maria explained. "We hadn't really settled into a congregation yet. Most of the churches have their hands full with their own members who lost everything." The admission hung in the air like incense, heavy with the weight of isolation that Ezra understood all too well. Since Sarah's death, he had felt increasingly disconnected from his own community, not through any fault of theirs, but because grief had a way of making a man feel alone, even in a crowd. Rex had been watching this exchange with the keen intelligence that German shepherds possessed, and now he rose from his position by Lucy's side and padded slowly toward Ezra. The dog's approach was cautious but not aggressive, more of an assessment than a challenge. "Rex, come," Tom called softly, but Ezra held out his hand, palm up, in the universal gesture of peace. "It's all right," Ezra said. "Animals often see more clearly than we do." Rex sniffed Ezra's hand once, twice, then sat back on his haunches. With what could only be described as approval, Lucy clapped her small hands together in delight. "Rex likes you," she announced. "He didn't like the man from the county who came by last week. He growled at him." "The county assessor," Tom explained grimly. "He said there might be other buyers interested in the property if the original sale fell through. We've been expecting someone to show up with eviction papers." Ezra absorbed this information while continuing his examination of the house. The kitchen was spacious, with good natural light from windows that faced east. The cabinets were water-damaged, but salvageable. Upstairs, he could see that the family had made a comfortable nest in the rooms that had stayed dry, sleeping bags on the floor, a few changes of clothes hanging from nails in the wall, and small touches that spoke of a mother's determination to maintain normalcy for her child. "You've kept the place clean," he observed. Maria's cheeks flushed. "We're not squatters, Mr. Miller. We may not have much, but we have our dignity. We've been maintaining the property as best we can, fixing what we're able to fix." Indeed, Ezra could see evidence of care everywhere he looked. Someone had swept the debris from the main rooms and wiped down surfaces. The stairs had been cleared and reinforced where a banister had come loose. In the kitchen, dishes were neatly stacked on a makeshift table. "Tom's handy with repairs," Maria continued. "He's been working on the place while looking for employment. We thought maybe whoever bought it might appreciate the improvements." Tom's pride warred visibly with his circumstances. "I know we had no right to make changes without permission, but the place needed basic repairs just to be safe for Lucy." Ezra nodded slowly, understanding more than they realized. In his Amish community, such initiative would be praised, not questioned. A man who saw work that needed doing and did it was a man of character, regardless of his legal claim to the property. "What are your plans now?" he asked. The question seemed to hang over the family like a storm cloud. Tom and Maria exchanged a look that spoke of many difficult conversations held in whispers after their daughter had fallen asleep. "We're not sure," Maria admitted. "Tom has some leads on work, but nothing certain. We've been hoping something would turn up before—" She gestured helplessly around the room. "Before you had to go," Ezra finished. "We understand this is your property now," Tom said firmly. "We're prepared to leave as soon as we can find somewhere else to go. We just need a little more time." Lucy had been listening to this adult conversation with the solemnity of a child who had learned too early that life could change without warning. Now she stepped forward and looked up at Ezra with eyes that held too much understanding for her years. "Mr. Miller," she said in her small, clear voice, "do you have any little girls?" The question pierced him like an arrow finding its mark. "No, child. My wife and I were never blessed with children." "Were you sad about that?" Lucy asked with devastating innocence. Ezra felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he thought about the children he and Sarah had longed for but never received. "Yes," he admitted. "We were very sad about that." Lucy nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "My mama says sometimes God saves the best presents for last. Maybe that's why you found us." The words hung in the air between them, spoken with the casual wisdom that children sometimes possess. Maria looked mortified at her daughter's boldness, but Ezra felt something shift inside his chest, like ice beginning to crack in spring. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows through the damaged windows. Ezra realized he had been standing in this house for over an hour, and in that time something had changed. The silence he had come seeking felt less like peace and more like emptiness. The solitude he had craved felt less like healing and more like slow death. But looking at this family, at Tom's quiet dignity, Maria's fierce protectiveness, Lucy's innocent hope, and Rex's steady loyalty, he felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's funeral: purpose. "The sun will be setting soon," he said finally, "and I have not eaten since morning." The family waited, uncertain what this announcement meant for their future. Ezra looked around the damaged kitchen one more time, then back at the three faces watching him. "Mrs. Brennan, do you suppose there might be enough food here for one? More at supper?" Maria's eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hide. "Yes, sir, there's always enough for one more." And so it was that Ezra Miller, who had come to this flooded farmhouse seeking solitude, found himself setting a makeshift table for four while a little girl chattered about her day and a German shepherd settled protectively at his feet. The first meal they shared was simple: canned soup heated on a camping stove, day-old bread from the church charity box, and water that still tasted faintly of mud. But as Ezra bowed his head to give thanks, he felt Sarah's presence so strongly that he almost looked up expecting to see her smile. Instead, he saw three faces lit by the warm glow of a battery-powered lantern, and he realized that sometimes God's answers to prayer came in forms we never expected to recognize. 3 days had passed since Ezra first shared a meal with the Brennan family, and the house had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Each morning he would wake before dawn in the small bedroom he had claimed downstairs, listening to the soft sounds of the family stirring upstairs, Maria's gentle voice coaxing Lucy awake, Tom's heavier footsteps crossing the floor, Rex's tags jingling as he stretched and yawned. The politeness between them was careful, like people walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Tom insisted on doing every repair he could manage without being asked, as if his labor could somehow pay the debt of their shelter. Maria kept the house spotless and cooked meals that stretched their meager supplies to include one more person. Lucy tried to be quiet and invisible, though her 8-year-old nature occasionally burst through in moments of forgotten joy. Ezra found himself caught between two worlds, the solitude he had sought and the unexpected comfort of voices other than his own echoing through the rooms. Each evening they would gather for supper and conversation, but always with the unspoken understanding that this arrangement was temporary. On the third morning, while Tom was outside reinforcing the front porch steps and Maria was hanging laundry on a makeshift line, Ezra found himself alone in the kitchen with the family's few belongings. He hadn't intended to pry, but as he reached for a coffee cup on the shelf, a folded paper fluttered to the floor from between the pages of Maria's water-damaged Bible. The document was official, bearing the letterhead of First National Bank of Millfield, and the words that caught his eye made his breath hitch in his throat. Final notice of foreclosure proceedings. Ezra's hands trembled as he read the details. The Brennan family hadn't just lost their rental home to the flood. They had been 3 months behind on rent, even before the disaster struck. Tom's hours at the grain mill had been cut back in the winter, and Maria's part-time work at the dress shop hadn't been enough to make up the difference. The flood had been the final blow, not the first. The notice was dated 2 weeks before the flood hit, and it outlined in stark legal language the family's mounting debts. Medical bills from Lucy's bout with pneumonia the previous winter, car repairs that had eaten into grocery money, the steady erosion of financial stability that happened to families everywhere, one emergency at a time. Mr. Miller. He turned to find Lucy standing in the doorway, her blonde hair still mussed from sleep, clutching her worn doll. Her blue eyes were wide with concern as she saw the paper in his hands. "Is that Mama's letter?" she asked in a small voice. "The one that makes her cry when she thinks I'm not looking?" Ezra's heart broke a little more. "Yes, child, I'm afraid it is." Lucy padded across the kitchen on bare feet and leaned against his arm with the unconscious trust that children gave so easily. "Daddy says we might have to go live in the car soon, but Rex is too big for the car, and I don't want to leave him behind." The simple statement hit Ezra like a physical blow. He looked down at this little girl who had already lost so much and was facing the loss of even more, and he felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. "Lucy, has your mama and daddy talked to you about what's going to happen?" She nodded solemnly. "They say we're looking for a new place to live, but all the places cost too much money. Mama cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. Daddy doesn't cry, but his face gets really sad." Before Ezra could respond, Maria's voice called from outside. "Lucy, honey, come help me with the laundry." Lucy scampered away, leaving Ezra alone with the foreclosure notice that explained so much about the careful politeness, the desperate gratitude, the way Tom's jaw tightened whenever money was mentioned. When Tom returned from his work on the porch, Ezra was waiting for him at the kitchen table, the documents spread out between them. Tom stopped in the doorway, his face cycling through embarrassment, anger and resignation. "You weren't meant to see that." "But I have seen it," Ezra replied gently, "and now I understand why you and your family are truly here." Tom slumped into the chair across from him, suddenly looking older than his 30 years. "We weren't lying to you, Mr. Miller. The flood did destroy our rental house, but we were already—" He struggled with the words. "We were already in trouble before that happened." "Tell me," Ezra said simply. The story came out in halting pieces. Tom's hours at the grain mill had been cut when the economy slowed. Maria's job at the dress shop was only part-time, no benefits, and the owner was struggling too. Lucy's pneumonia in February had meant missed work for both parents and medical bills that ate through their small savings. "We kept thinking we'd catch up," Tom said, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "We'd get ahead of it somehow. But then Lucy got sick again in March. Just a cold, but we couldn't risk it being something worse. More missed work, more bills. We never asked for charity," he continued, his voice tight with pride. "We always found a way to make it work. But the flood, when that water came, it took everything we had left. Our car won't start. All our furniture is ruined. And even if we found a place to rent, we don't have first and last month's rent plus deposit." Maria appeared in the doorway, having heard the last part of the conversation. Her face was flushed with shame and worry. "Tom, you don't need to." "He has a right to know, Maria," Tom said quietly. "Mr. Miller, we're not asking you for anything more than you've already given us. Just time, maybe another week or two to figure something out." Ezra studied the young couple before him. These two people who had faced one blow after another and still maintained their dignity, their love for each other, their devotion to their daughter. In their situation, many would have given up or grown bitter. Instead, they had kept fighting, kept hoping, kept caring for each other and their child. "What would you do?" he asked. "If you had no constraints, no limitations, what would you choose?" Maria and Tom exchanged a look that spoke of dreams they had long since stopped voicing. "We'd find a place where Lucy could go to school and make friends," Maria said softly. "Somewhere safe, where she could have a normal childhood. I'd find steady work," Tom added. "Something where I could use my hands, maybe learn a trade. I'm good with carpentry, always have been." "We'd have a little garden," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "I could can vegetables for winter, maybe sell some preserves at the farmer's market. We'd go to church as a family. We'd have a home," Tom finished simply. "Not just a place to sleep, but a real home." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, thinking of Sarah and the dreams they had shared, the children they had wanted to raise, the legacy they had hoped to leave, the love they had wanted to pass on to another generation. "There is something you should know about this house," he said finally. "Something the county auction didn't mention." He pulled out the original deed and spread it alongside the foreclosure notice. "This property is worth considerably more than what I paid for it. The county made an error in their assessment, listing it as flood damage beyond repair. But the damage is mostly cosmetic. The foundation is solid, the roof is sound, the well water is clean." Tom leaned forward, studying the documents. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this house, with some work, could be worth $15,000 or more. The county sold it to me for $100 because they needed it off their books quickly." Maria sank into a chair, her face pale. "So you could sell it and make a real profit?" "Yes," Ezra agreed, "I could." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. With $15,000, the family could start over somewhere else. But that would mean leaving, and Ezra would be alone again with his grief and his silence. Before anyone could speak, Lucy burst through the kitchen door, Rex at her heels. She stopped short when she saw the serious faces of the adults, her natural intuition telling her something important was happening. "Are we talking about the sad stuff again?" she asked with the directness of childhood. "Yes, sweetheart," Maria said, pulling her daughter close. "We're talking about some grown-up things." Lucy studied each face carefully, then walked over to Ezra and climbed up onto his lap with the casual affection she might show a grandfather. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Ezra felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Mr. Miller," Lucy said, looking up at him with serious blue eyes, "Mama told me about your wife who went to heaven. Were you very lonely after she left?" The question was asked with such innocent compassion that Ezra couldn't find words to answer immediately. Finally, he managed, "Yes, child, I was very lonely." "Are you still lonely now?" she asked. Ezra looked around the kitchen, at Tom and Maria watching him with hope and fear warring in their eyes, at Rex settled comfortably at his feet as if he belonged there, at Lucy's small face full of trust and affection, and he realized something profound had changed in the past 3 days. "No," he said softly, "I don't believe I am lonely anymore." Lucy smiled with satisfaction, as if she had solved a particularly difficult puzzle. "Then maybe you don't have to sell the house. Maybe we could all just stay here together." Out of the mouths of babes, Ezra thought, remembering Sarah's fondness for that particular phrase. She'd always believed that children saw truth more clearly than adults, uncomplicated by pride or fear or the weight of expectations. Tom started to speak, probably to explain why Lucy's simple solution wasn't possible, but Ezra held up a gentle, "And that," he said, "is exactly what I was thinking." The words hung in the air like a prayer answered, like a door opening onto possibilities none of them had dared to imagine. Maria's eyes filled with tears, Tom's jaw worked soundlessly, and Lucy clapped her hands together in pure joy. Rex, as if sensing the shift in the household's energy, stood up and walked to each person in turn, pressing his warm body against their legs in a gesture of approval and protection. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds that had hung over the valley for days, sending golden light streaming through the kitchen windows and illuminating the faces of 4 people who had found in each other something they hadn't even known they were looking for. The foreclosure notice still lay on the table, but somehow it no longer seemed like an ending. Instead, it felt like the last page of an old story, making room for a new one to begin. The first week of their new arrangement began with the kind of awkward domesticity that happens when strangers try to become family overnight. Ezra woke each morning to the unfamiliar sounds of a household in motion, footsteps overhead, water running through pipes that hadn't been used in months, the distant murmur of Maria's voice as she helped Lucy dress for the day. He had lived alone for 6 months, since Sarah's passing, and before that, his marriage had been marked by the quiet rhythms of 2 people who knew each other's habits like familiar prayers. This new chaos of family life was both overwhelming and oddly comforting, like learning to hear music after years of silence. The kitchen became their testing ground. Sarah had been the cook in their marriage, and Ezra's attempts at feeding himself had been basic at best. Oatmeal for breakfast, soup from a can for lunch, simple sandwiches that required no particular skill. But now there were 4 people to consider, and his bachelor meals seemed inadequate for a family. On Monday morning, he stood before the old gas stove, staring at a pan of eggs that had somehow transformed into something resembling yellow rubber. Lucy appeared at his elbow, her blonde hair in pigtails that Maria had woven with the practiced efficiency of motherhood. "Those don't look very good," Lucy observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "No," Ezra said firmly. "This is your home. Now, you don't hide in your own home." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise the Brennan family, but as he said them, he realized they were true. Somewhere in the past week, this had stopped being his house with temporary guests and had become their shared home. He walked to the front door, straightening his shoulders in preparation for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. Behind him, he could hear Maria quietly instructing Lucy to stay close, and Tom moving to the window where he could keep an eye on the proceedings. Samuel Yoder was already approaching the porch, his black hat perfectly positioned, his beard neatly trimmed, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he had serious concerns to discuss. Rebecca followed a step behind, her prayer covering pristine white, her dark dress spotless despite the buggy ride over dusty roads. "Ezra," Samuel said with a formal nod. "Good morning to you." "Samuel, Rebecca," Ezra replied, inclining his head respectfully. "What brings you out this way so early?" "We've heard some things," Samuel said carefully, "about your new living situation. We thought it best to come see for ourselves, to make sure you're managing well in your grief." The words were kind on the surface, but Ezra heard the underlying message clearly enough. The community had heard about the English family living in his house, and they were concerned about the propriety of the arrangement. "I'm managing better than I have in months," Ezra replied honestly. Before Samuel could respond, the front door opened and Lucy appeared, drawn by curiosity that was stronger than her mother's instructions to stay inside. She stared up at the 2 Amish visitors with wide eyes, taking in their plain clothes and serious expressions. "Hello," she said politely. "Are you friends of Mr. Miller's?" Rebecca's stern expression softened slightly at the sight of the small girl. "We are his neighbors, child, and who might you be?" "I'm Lucy Brennan," Lucy announced proudly. "I live here with my mama and daddy and Rex. Rex is our dog, but he's friendly. Want to meet him? Before anyone could answer, Rex appeared at Lucy's side, his tail wagging tentatively as he assessed these new visitors. The German shepherd's presence seemed to fill the porch, and Samuel took an unconscious step backward. "Lucy!" Maria's voice came from the doorway, gentle but firm. "Come back inside, sweetheart." But Lucy was already chattering on, oblivious to the adult tension surrounding her. "Mr. Miller is teaching us about Amish cooking, and Mama is teaching him how to make eggs that don't taste like rubber. Do you know how to cook? Do you have any little girls I could play with?" Maria appeared in the doorway, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but her chin raised with quiet dignity. "I'm sorry, Lucy. Come inside now." "It's quite all right," Rebecca said, her voice warmer than her husband's. "Children should be curious about their neighbors." Tom joined his wife in the doorway, and Ezra could see Samuel taking inventory. The young English couple, their child, the dog, all clearly established in what should have been Ezra's solitary refuge. "Perhaps we could speak privately, Ezra," Samuel suggested, his gaze meaningful. "Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of my—" Ezra paused, realizing he was about to say family, and knowing how that would sound to his conservative neighbors. "In front of my guests." "Guests," Samuel repeated, and the word carried weight. "Ezra, we've been friends for many years. I knew you when you first married Sarah, watched you build your life together. I know these past months have been difficult. For you, they have been," Ezra agreed. "Sometimes, when a man is grieving, he makes decisions that he might not make in clearer circumstances," Samuel continued carefully. "The community is concerned about you, about your welfare, your spiritual well-being. My spiritual well-being is quite sound, thank you." "Is it?" Samuel's voice grew more direct. "Ezra, you have English strangers living in your house. A man, his wife, their child. This arrangement, it doesn't look proper. It gives the appearance of impropriety, even if your intentions are pure." Tom stepped forward, his face flushing with anger. "Now, wait just a minute." "Tom," Ezra said quietly, raising a hand, "let me handle this." He turned back to Samuel, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had made peace with his choices. "Samuel, when Christ walked the earth, who did he choose to spend his time with? The respectable people, or the ones that society had written off?" "That's hardly the same thing, Ezra." "Isn't it? This family lost everything in the flood. They had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I have a house with empty rooms and food I can share. Tell me, Samuel, what would Christ have me do? Turn them away because they're English? Let a child sleep in a car because her parents don't dress plain?" Rebecca touched her husband's arm gently. "Perhaps we should hear their story before we judge, Samuel." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Very well." Maria stepped forward. Lucy pressed close to her side. "Mr. and Mrs. Yoder, I understand your concern. If I were in your position, I might feel the same way. But I want you to know that Mr. Miller has been nothing but honorable and kind to us. He's given us shelter when we had nowhere else to go, and he's asked for nothing in return except that we treat his home with respect." "Which we do," Tom added firmly. "Every day. We're not charity cases looking for a handout. I'm looking for work, and as soon as I find steady employment, we'll be contributing to the household expenses. In the meantime," Maria continued, "I've been helping with the cooking and housekeeping. Mr. Miller—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "He's been alone since his wife passed. I think maybe we help each other in ways that don't have anything to do with money." Lucy, who had been listening to this adult conversation with growing concern, suddenly stepped forward and looked up at Samuel with serious blue eyes. "Mr. Samuel," she said in her clear young voice, "are you trying to make us go away?" The direct question from the child seemed to catch Samuel off guard. That's not. We're simply concerned about proper arrangements." "What's proper arrangements?" Lucy asked, with the persistence of childhood. Samuel looked helplessly at Rebecca, who knelt down to Lucy's eye level. "It means that people should live in ways that are right and good, little one." "But we are living right and good," Lucy said earnestly. We say grace before every meal, and we help each other, and Mr. Miller reads us stories sometimes. Mama says that's what families do." The word families hung in the air between them, and Ezra felt something shift in his chest. This child, with her innocent honesty, had named what none of the adults had been willing to say out loud. "Rebecca," Ezra said quietly, "do you remember what you told me at Sarah's funeral? About how God sometimes answers prayers in ways we don't expect?" Rebecca's expression softened with memory. "I remember. For 45 years, Sarah and I prayed for children. We never understood why that prayer wasn't answered. But maybe," he looked at Lucy, then at Tom and Maria, "maybe it just took longer than we expected." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying the group assembled on the porch. Rex had settled himself at Lucy's feet, his watchful eyes moving between the adults as if he too understood that something important was being decided. Finally, Samuel spoke. "The community will have questions, Ezra. There will be talk." "There's always talk," Ezra replied. "The question is whether we live by love or by fear of what people might say." Rebecca stood up from her conversation with Lucy and touched her husband's arm again. "Samuel, I think we should go. Mr. Miller has clearly given this matter much thought and prayer." Samuel nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. "Ezra, if you need anything, if this arrangement becomes difficult in any way, you know you can come to us." "I do know that," Ezra said, "and I'm grateful for it." As the Yodas climbed back into their buggy, Lucy waved enthusiastically from the porch. "Bye, Mr. Samuel. Bye, Mrs. Rebecca. Come back and visit us again." Rebecca smiled and waved back, but Samuel kept his eyes forward as he guided the horse down the drive. When the buggy had disappeared around the bend, Tom let out a long breath. "Well, that was interesting. I'm sorry," Ezra said, turning to face the family. "I should have warned you that this might happen. My community, we have strong beliefs about proper behavior, and this situation is unusual by our standards." "Will there be trouble?" Maria asked quietly. "There might be," Ezra admitted. "But there might not be. Change is hard for any community, but good people usually find their way to the right thing eventually." Lucy tugged on his shirt. "Mr. Miller, what did you mean when you said maybe God answered your prayers late?" Ezra knelt down to her level. "This precious child who saw truth so clearly. I meant that sometimes the best things come to us when we're not expecting them. And sometimes the family we're meant to have isn't the family we thought we wanted." Lucy considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "So we're your family now? For real?" The question pierced him with its directness and its hope. He looked up at Tom and Maria, saw the mixture of longing and uncertainty in their faces, and felt the last of his resistance crumble. "Yes," he said simply, "for real." And as Lucy threw her arms around his neck in pure joy, Ezra realized that Sarah's recipe box wasn't the only thing that had survived the flood. Love, it seemed, was even more resilient than he'd dared to hope. Ezra agreed solemnly. "I'm afraid." "They don't. Mama makes really good eggs. Want me to get her?" Before Ezra could answer, Maria appeared in the doorway, drawn by the smell of something burning. She took in the scene with a quick glance, Ezra looking helpless in front of the stove, Lucy trying to be helpful, and breakfast clearly heading toward disaster. "May I?" Maria asked gently, and when Ezra stepped aside with obvious relief, she moved to the stove with the kind of confident grace that spoke of years of feeding a family on a tight budget. "The trick," she said as she scraped the ruined eggs into the garbage, "is to keep them moving, low-heat patience, and never walk away." She cracked fresh eggs into the pan, and Ezra watched as she worked, her movements economical and sure, her attention divided between the stove and Lucy, who was chattering about a dream she'd had about Rex learning to fly. "My Sarah used to say I could burn water," Ezra admitted. "She did all the cooking for 45 years. "What did she like to make?" Maria asked, whisking the eggs with practiced efficiency. "Everything," Ezra said, and the word came out heavier than he intended. She had a way with food that made even simple things taste like celebration. Sunday dinners, holiday meals, the kind of bread that made the whole house smell like heaven. Maria was quiet for a moment, focusing on the eggs that were now beginning to form soft, creamy curds in the pan. It must be hard, learning to do the things she always did. Harder than I expected, Ezra admitted. Not just the cooking, everything. I find myself reaching for the phone to call her or saving something. Do tell her later. 6 months and I still set 2 places at the table sometimes. Lucy, who had been listening with the intense attention that children gave to adult conversations they sensed were important, tugged on Ezra's shirt. My grandma died last year, and Mama still talks to her sometimes. She says it's okay to miss people even when they're in heaven. The simple wisdom of the child's words hit Ezra in a place that still felt tender. Your Mama is a very smart woman. She is, Lucy agreed seriously. She knows how to make lots of things. Want to see? Before anyone could stop her, Lucy had darted to the corner where the family's salvaged belongings were stacked and returned with a small wooden box that bore the water stains of the flood but had obviously been crafted with love and care. Mama's recipe box, Lucy announced proudly. Daddy made it for her when I was little. Maria flushed slightly as she plated the eggs, which had turned out perfectly golden and fluffy. Lucy, Mr. Miller doesn't need to see. Please, Ezra said, accepting the box with the reverence it deserved. I'd be honored. The box was beautiful despite its water damage. Cherry wood with dovetail joints that spoke of real craftsmanship. Inside, recipe cards were arranged in careful categories, some typed on index cards, others written in flowing script, a few that looked like they had been copied from magazines or newspapers. Mama has the best recipes, Lucy said, climbing onto a chair beside Ezra. She makes cookies that taste like Christmas, and soup that makes you feel better when you're sick, and this thing called shepherd's pie that has meat and potatoes and makes Daddy say, mmm, really loud. Ezra smiled despite himself, pulling out a card at random. It was for something called Crisis Casserole, written in Maria's careful handwriting with a note at the bottom. Good for feeding a crowd when money's tight and spirits are low. This looks useful, he said, showing Maria the card. She laughed, a sound that transformed her face from worried to genuinely happy. That was from when Tom was laid off 3 years ago. We had to get creative with ground beef and whatever vegetables were on sale. It was really good. Tom's voice came from the doorway, where he had appeared with his hair damp from washing and his work clothes already showing the signs of morning repairs. Even if Maria did have to serve it 4 nights in a row, it was. Not 4 nights, Maria protested, but she was smiling as she handed Tom a plate of eggs. 3.5, Tom corrected, dropping a kiss on his wife's cheek before settling at the table. But who's counting? Ezra continued browsing through the recipe cards, each one telling a story of family traditions, budget-conscious creativity, and the kind of love that showed itself through the daily act of nourishing the people you cared about. Some were clearly family heirlooms, great-grandma's apple butter, Aunt Rose's famous cornbread. Others were the accumulated wisdom of a young mother learning to feed her family, quick chicken and rice, emergency chocolate cake. These are treasures, he said finally, real treasures. They got pretty damaged in the flood, Maria said, her voice carrying the weight of loss. Some of them are barely readable now, but they're still here, Ezra pointed out. The important ones survived. He paused at a card that was more damaged than the others, the writing faded but still legible. Sarah's Sunday pot roast. His breath caught in his throat. That's from my friend Sarah back in Indiana, Maria explained, noticing his reaction. We were in a cooking club together at church. She taught me how to make a roast that would fall apart with a fork. Sarah, Ezra repeated softly. She was about your wife's age, I think. Silver hair, always laughing, hands that could make anything taste good. She used to say that cooking was just love made edible. Maria's voice grew wistful. I miss her cooking club. We all brought our kids, and the women would share recipes while the children played. It was like having a big, extended family. Ezra stared at the recipe card, thinking of his own Sarah and her Sunday pot roasts, her laughter filling their kitchen, her hands that had indeed made everything taste like love. The coincidence felt like more than coincidence, like a message from a place beyond his understanding. "Would you?" he started, then stopped, unsure how to ask what he wanted to ask. "Would I what?" Maria prompted gently. "Would you teach me?" The words came out in a rush. "To cook, I mean. Some of these recipes, the simple ones. I can't go on burning eggs forever." Maria's smile was warm and genuine. "I'd love to teach you, Mr. Miller. And maybe you could teach me some of your wife's recipes? The Amish way of cooking?" "I don't know many of them," Ezra admitted. "I watched her, but I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been. But there are some I remember." Lucy bounced in her chair with excitement. "Can I help too? I'm a really good helper in the kitchen. Mama says I'm getting old enough to learn important things." "Everyone can help," Ezra decided. "We'll learn together." Tom cleared his throat, and when Ezra looked at him, he saw a mix of gratitude and uncertainty in the younger man's eyes. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate everything you're doing for us, more than I can say. But I need you to know that we're not looking for charity. I'm still looking for work, and as soon as I find steady employment, we'll start paying our way." "Of course," Ezra replied. "A man needs to contribute to his household, but in the meantime, there's work to be done here. This house needs more repairs than I can manage alone, and I could use help with some of the heavier tasks." "I'm good with my hands," Tom said eagerly. "I can do carpentry, basic plumbing, electrical work if it's not too complicated. And I can sew," Maria added. "Mending, alterations, simple tailoring. I could take in work once word gets around." Rex, who had been lying quietly by Lucy's chair, suddenly stood and padded to the kitchen window, his ears pricked forward. A moment later, they heard the sound of a buggy approaching, the clip-clop of hooves on the gravel drive unmistakable. Ezra's stomach tightened. He recognized that particular rhythm. It was his neighbor Samuel Yoder's horse, and Samuel only made unannounced visits when there was community business to discuss. "Friends of yours?" Tom asked, noting the change in Ezra's expression. "Neighbors," Ezra replied carefully. "From my community." The Brennan family exchanged glances, and Ezra could see them processing what this might mean. They had been living in their temporary bubble of domesticity, but the outside world was about to intrude, bringing with it questions that Ezra wasn't entirely ready to answer. Lucy, oblivious to the adult tension, pressed her face to the window. "It's a horse and buggy, a real one. Can I go see the horse?" "Let's wait and see what they want first," Maria said gently, pulling Lucy away from the window. The buggy rolled to a stop in the yard, and Ezra could see two figures inside. Samuel Yoder and his wife Rebecca. Samuel was a good man, a deacon in their church district, but he was also someone who took community standards very seriously. Rebecca was known for her kindness, but also for her ability to spread news faster than any telephone. "I should go speak with them," Ezra said, rising from the table. "Should we?" Tom gestured vaguely toward the stairs, indicating that perhaps the family should make themselves scarce. "No." The second week brought with it the kind of challenges that test the foundation of any new family arrangement. The honeymoon period of careful politeness had ended, replaced by the messier reality of people learning to live together when their backgrounds, habits, and expectations didn't always align. Tom's frustration was the most visible. Each morning, he would dress in his one remaining good shirt and drive Ezra's old pickup truck to town, returning hours later with the same defeated expression and the same apologetic explanation. The job had been filled, or they weren't hiring, or they needed someone with different experience. "It's not that there's no work," he explained to Ezra on Thursday evening, as they sat on the front porch watching Lucy play with Rex in the yard. "It's that everyone wants someone they know, someone local, and being from out of state doesn't help." The worn leather work boots that Tom polished every night had become a symbol of his determination. They were scuffed and weathered from years of honest labor, but he maintained them with the pride of a man who defined himself by his ability to provide for his family. "The grain mill where I worked in Indiana," Tom continued, his voice tight with frustration. "I was assistant foreman. 12 years I worked my way up from the loading dock, but that doesn't seem to matter here. Here, I'm just another flood refugee looking for charity." Ezra understood the younger man's struggle more than Tom might realize. In Amish culture, a man's worth was measured by his contribution to his community, his ability to care for his family, through the work of his hands. To be dependent on others, even temporarily, was a burden that weighed heavily on the spirit. "There's good work to be done here," Ezra said quietly. "The flood damaged many farms in the valley. Barns need rebuilding, fences need repair, fields need to be cleared of debris before spring planting." "That's temporary work," Tom replied. "Day labor if I'm lucky. What happens when winter comes and there's nothing to fix?" It was a fair question, and Ezra didn't have an easy answer. But as he watched Lucy teaching Rex to sit and stay with the patient persistence that she'd inherited from her mother, he felt a growing certainty that this family belonged here, that their presence had already begun to fill spaces in his life he hadn't even realized were empty. "Come with me tomorrow," Ezra said finally, "to see Jacob Byler. He owns the largest construction company in the county, builds houses, barns, commercial buildings. He's Amish, but he hires good men regardless of their background." Tom's head turned sharply. "You do that? Introduce me to your people." "Your family now," Ezra said simply. "Family helps family find their way." Inside the house, Maria was dealing with her own adjustments. The kitchen had become her domain by necessity and inclination, but learning to cook for Ezra meant understanding dietary preferences shaped by a lifetime of plain living. He didn't complain about anything she prepared, but she could see him struggling with dishes that were too spicy, too rich, or too far removed from the simple foods of his upbringing. "I don't know how to cook Amish," she confessed to him Friday morning as she stood before the stove, holding a recipe card that called for ingredients she'd never heard of. "What does this mean, cook until it's done?" she asked, showing him a recipe for something called poor man's steak that was written in Sarah's careful script. Ezra studied the card, and Maria could see the pain that crossed his face whenever he encountered something that belonged to his late wife. But increasingly that pain was mixed with something warmer, the joy of sharing memories rather than simply enduring them. "Sarah never measured anything," he admitted with a small smile. "She cooked by feel, by smell, by the way things looked. A pinch of this, a handful of that, drove our neighbor women crazy when they tried to copy her recipes." "That doesn't help me much," Maria said with a laugh. "I'm a measuring cup kind of cook. I need to know exactly how much of everything." "Then we'll figure it out together," Ezra said, rolling up his sleeves. "Sarah always said the best way to learn to cook was to ruin a few meals first." They spent the morning working side by side, translating Sarah's intuitive measurements into precise amounts that Maria could follow. Lucy helped by being the official taste tester, pronouncing each attempt either yummy or needs more salt with the honest assessment of childhood. Rex had appointed himself the kitchen's cleanup crew, positioning himself strategically to catch any dropped ingredients. His presence had become such a natural part of the household that when Ezra accidentally called him boy instead of Rex, the dog responded with the same enthusiasm. "He likes you," Lucy observed, scratching Rex behind the ears. "He only comes when Daddy calls him if he's in trouble, but he comes every time you call him." It was true. The German shepherd had transferred some of his loyalty to Ezra, following him around the property as he did his morning chores, lying at his feet during evening conversations on the porch. The dog seemed to understand, in the way that animals sometimes do, that this older man needed protection and companionship as much as the family he'd been guarding. The breakthrough in their domestic arrangements came on Saturday, when Maria found the courage to make a suggestion that had been building in her mind for days. "Mr. Miller," she said as they cleaned up after breakfast. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "You mentioned that Sarah used to mend your clothes, and I noticed—" She gestured delicately toward his shirts, which bore the signs of a man who had been caring for himself without much skill. "I'm good with the needle. I was wondering if you'd let me help with that." Ezra looked down at his shirt, seeing it through her eyes. The loose button, the small tear near the pocket, the general rumpled appearance of clothing that had been laundered but not really cared for. "I wouldn't want to impose," he said carefully. "It wouldn't be an imposition," Maria replied. "It would be contribution, something I could do to help, to feel useful here." The word useful carried weight. Maria had been a seamstress before her marriage, had worked part-time at the dress shop until the flood. Her identity, like Tom's, was tied to her ability to contribute meaningfully to her household. "I'd be grateful." "For the help," Ezra admitted. "I'm afraid I've been hard on my clothes these past months." That afternoon, Maria set up her sewing supplies at the kitchen table, a small collection of needles, thread, and tools that had survived the flood in a waterproof case. Lucy sat beside her, learning to thread needles and practicing simple stitches. "On scraps of fabric, Mama used to make all my clothes," Lucy announced proudly. "And she made Daddy's work shirts, and she fixed everything that got broken." "Your Mama has skilled hands," Ezra observed, watching Maria's precise, efficient movements as she repaired a buttonhole that had been pulling loose for weeks. "She made my wedding dress," Maria said softly, her attention focused on her work. "Saved for months to buy the fabric, worked on it every evening after Tom went to bed. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned." "What happened to it?" Lucy asked. "The flood," Maria replied simply. "It was in the cedar chest with all our other precious things. Wedding album, baby pictures, family documents, all gone." The loss in her voice was profound, and Ezra felt an unexpected surge of anger at the unfairness of it. This family had lost not just their possessions, but their history, their proof of the life they'd built together. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately. "Things can be replaced," Maria said, but her voice caught slightly. "Most things, anyway." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the recovering valley, Tom brought up the subject that had been weighing on all their minds. "Mr. Miller, we need to talk about money." Ezra had been expecting this conversation, dreading it in some ways. Money had a way of complicating relationships, turning generosity into obligation, and gratitude into resentment. "What about it?" he asked carefully. "We can't keep living here without contributing anything," Tom said firmly. "I know you said not to worry about it right now, but it's been 2 weeks. We're eating your food, using your utilities, taking up space in your house. That's not right." "You're contributing more than you realize," Ezra replied. "This house is more alive now than it's been since Sarah died. There's laughter in the kitchen, purpose in the daily routine. That has value too." "But not monetary value," Tom pressed. "Look, I know we can't pay market rent right now, but we need to work out some kind of arrangement. Maybe I could do more repairs around the place, or we could share the grocery expenses, or—" "Tom," Ezra interrupted gently, "what would you say if I told you I've been thinking about this house differently? Not as a place where I'm housing guests, but as a family home that needs a family to make it complete." Tom was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that maybe this arrangement could be more permanent than any of us originally planned. Maybe we could work out something that benefits everyone." Maria leaned forward in her chair. "You mean we could stay, really stay? I mean we could consider making this official, a partnership of sorts. You contribute your skills, your energy, your family. I provide the house, the land, the stability of ownership. We share expenses, share responsibilities, share the work of building something together." Lucy, who had been half listening to the adult conversation while playing with Rex, suddenly sat up straight. "Does that mean we don't have to move again? Ever?" The hope in her young voice was almost painful to hear. This child had experienced too much uncertainty in her short life, too many nights of adult whispers about money troubles and impossible choices. "It means we'd all have to want the same thing," Ezra said carefully. "It means we'd have to be sure this is what's best for everyone." Tom and Maria exchanged one of their wordless conversations, the kind that long-married couples perfected. Finally, Tom spoke. "What would that look like, this partnership?" "We'd figure it out as we go," Ezra admitted. "There's no rule book for this kind of arrangement. But I know that I've been happier these past 2 weeks than I've been since Sarah died. And I know that you're good people who deserve a chance to build a stable life for your daughter." Rex, as if sensing the importance of the moment, rose from his position by Lucy's feet and walked to each adult in turn, pressing his warm body against their legs in a gesture that felt like approval. "There's something else," Ezra said quietly. "Something you should know before you make any decisions." He told them about his conversation with Sarah at her graveside the week before, about the certainty he'd felt that she would have loved this family, would have welcomed them without hesitation. "She always said our house was too quiet," he finished, "that it needed the sound of children's laughter to make it complete. Maybe this is her way of making sure that happens." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and even Tom's stoic expression softened. Lucy, with the emotional honesty of childhood, climbed onto Ezra's lap and hugged him tightly. "I love you, Mr. Miller," she said simply. "I love living here with you." "I love you too, little one," Ezra replied, and realized he meant it completely. "I love all of you." As the stars appeared overhead and the night sounds of the countryside settled around them, 4 people who had been strangers 3 weeks earlier made a decision that would change all of their lives forever. They would stay together. They would build something new from the pieces of their separate losses. They would become, in every way that mattered, a family. 1 month into their arrangement, the rhythms of their shared life had settled into something that felt almost normal. Tom had found steady work with Jacob Byler's construction crew, coming home each evening with stories of barn raisings and the particular satisfaction of honest labor. Maria had established herself as the household's domestic heart, her cooking now seamlessly blending Amish simplicity with her own family traditions. Lucy had started attending the one-room Amish school, her natural curiosity and gentle manner, helping her bridge the gap between English and plain. But it was Lucy's latest creation that would force them all to confront questions they'd been carefully avoiding. "Look what I made," she announced on a crisp October morning, bursting into the kitchen where the adults were sharing coffee and planning the day's tasks. In her small hands, she clutched a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. Rex, who had been lying peacefully by the stove, lifted his head to inspect Lucy's artwork, with the same attention he gave to everything that excited his young charge. "It's for family picture day at school," Lucy continued proudly. "Teacher Mary said we should draw our families, so I drew mine." She spread the paper on the kitchen table with the reverence of a child presenting a masterpiece. The drawing showed 4 stick figures standing in front of a house. A tall figure in black with a beard, clearly Ezra, a woman with long brown hair, Maria, a man with short hair, Tom, and a small girl with yellow pigtails, Lucy herself. A large dog sat faithfully beside them, and the house behind them was colored in cheerful blues and greens. Above the drawing, in Lucy's careful first-grade handwriting, were the words, "My family." The 3 adults stared at the picture in silence, each processing the implications in their own way. Lucy had done what none of them had been willing to do. She had named their reality without hesitation or apology. "Lucy," Maria said carefully, "you know that Mr. Miller isn't really your grandfather, right? He's our friend who lets us live here." Lucy's blue eyes were serious as she considered this. "But he reads me stories like Grandpa Joe used to, and he teaches me about plants and animals. And he gets worried when I don't eat my vegetables. That's what grandpas do. But honey," Tom tried. "When people ask about your family at school, they might not understand. Teacher Mary asked me to tell the class about my picture," Lucy interrupted. "She said I should explain who everyone is, so I practiced." Before anyone could stop her, Lucy launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed presentation. "This is my Mama Maria, and this is my Daddy Tom, and this is my Grandpa Ezra, who takes care of all of us. We live together in a big house with Rex, and we're a family because we love each other and take care of each other and say grace together every night." The innocent certainty in her voice was devastating. This 8-year-old had solved in her heart what the adults were still struggling to define in their minds. Ezra felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Lucy, what did Teacher Mary say when you practiced your presentation?" She smiled really big. "And said it sounded like I have a very special family," Lucy replied proudly. "She said love makes families, not just being born to the same people." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she turned away toward the window, ostensibly to check the weather, but really to compose herself. Tom ran a hand through his hair. A gesture Ezra had learned meant he was processing something difficult. "Sweetheart," Tom said finally, "you know that some people might not understand our situation, right? They might ask questions about why we live with Mr. Miller." "What kind of questions?" Lucy asked with the directness of childhood. The adults exchanged glances, none of them sure how to explain the complex social expectations that their arrangement challenged. "Some people think families should only be people who are related by blood or marriage," Maria said carefully. "They might not understand how we can all be family when we're not related in the traditional way." Lucy considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "But we are related. We're related by choosing each other." The wisdom of her words hit them all like a revelation. Out of the mouths of babes, Ezra thought, remembering Sarah's favorite biblical phrase. "You're absolutely right," he said finally. "We are related by choice, and that's a very powerful kind of family bond. So I can tell everyone at school that—" "You're my grandpa?" Lucy asked hopefully. Ezra knelt down to her level, this precious child who had somehow become the heart of their household. "If that's how you see me, then yes, I would be honored to be your grandpa." Lucy threw her arms around his neck with the uninhibited joy that only children possess. "I knew it. I knew you were supposed to be my grandpa." Over Lucy's shoulder, Ezra saw Tom and Maria watching this exchange with expressions that mixed happiness with uncertainty. He understood their concern. Lucy's innocent declaration would force them all to deal with community reactions they'd been postponing. The first test came that very afternoon. Ezra was in the barn, teaching Lucy how to properly care for the 2 dairy cows he kept, when a familiar buggy rolled up the drive. This time it wasn't just Samuel and Rebecca Yoder, it was a small delegation that included Bishop Moses Stoltzfus, the spiritual leader of their church district, and Elder John Lapp, a man known for his strict interpretation of community standards. Rex announced their arrival with a single bark before settling back into his watchful position by Lucy's side. The dog had learned to read the intentions of visitors, and his calm demeanor suggested these weren't immediate threats, just people who required careful navigation. "Lucy," Ezra said quietly, "why don't you take Rex and go tell your mama and daddy that we have visitors?" "But I want to see the Amish people up close," Lucy protested. "I've only seen them at school and at the store. They dress just like you do." "You'll have plenty of chances to meet them," Ezra assured her. "But right now I need to talk to them about grown-up things." Lucy nodded with understanding beyond her years and skipped toward the house, Rex trotting beside her like a faithful shadow. Ezra took a deep breath and walked out to meet his visitors, steeling himself for what he knew would be a more formal version of the conversation he'd had with Samuel and Rebecca weeks earlier. Bishop Moses was a tall, thin man with a snow-white beard and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. He had baptized Ezra 48 years ago, had performed his marriage ceremony to Sarah, had spoken words of comfort at her funeral. If anyone had the right to question Ezra's choices, It was this man who had shepherded his spiritual life for nearly 5 decades. "Ezra," the bishop said with a nod, "we've come to speak with you about your living arrangements." "I assumed as much," Ezra replied. "Would you like to come up to the house?" "That might be wise," Elder Lapp said curtly. "This conversation concerns the people living there as well." They walked in silence toward the house, and Ezra could feel the weight of judgment in the air around them. These men weren't necessarily hostile, but they were concerned about precedent, about community standards, about the implications of one of their members establishing such an unconventional household. Tom met them at the front door, his work clothes, clean, but his hands still bearing the honest dirt of a day's labor. His posture was respectful but not subservient, the bearing of a man who understood he was being evaluated and was prepared to defend his family's position. "Bishop, gentlemen," Tom said with a polite nod. "Please come in." Maria appeared beside. Her husband, Lucy, pressed close to her side. She had changed into her best dress and had tied her hair back in a neat bun, clearly understanding the importance of first impressions. "I'm Maria Brennan," she said with quiet dignity. "This is my husband Tom and our daughter Lucy. You're welcome in our home." The phrase "our home" hung in the air, and Ezra saw Elder Lapp's eyebrows rise slightly, but Bishop Moses accepted Maria's greeting with a courteous nod. They gathered in the living room that had been transformed by Maria's touch, clean and tidy, with wildflowers from the yard arranged in mason jars, and Lucy's school papers displayed proudly on the mantelpiece. "Mr. Brennan," Bishop Moses began formally, "we understand you and your family have been living here with Ezra for some time now." "A month," Tom replied, "ever since Mr. Miller graciously offered us shelter after we lost our home in the flood." "And what are your intentions for the future?" Elder Lapp asked bluntly. Tom and Maria exchanged a quick glance, and Ezra could see them weighing their words carefully. "Our intention is to build a good life for our daughter," Maria said finally, "to contribute to our community, to be good neighbors, to raise Lucy with strong values and a sense of responsibility." "That's admirable," Bishop Moses said, "but it doesn't answer the question. Do you intend to make this arrangement permanent?" Before Tom or Maria could answer, Lucy stepped forward with the fearless honesty of childhood. "We're a family now," she announced. "Grandpa Ezra and Mama and Daddy and me and Rex. We take care of each other." Elder Lapp's stern expression didn't soften. "Child, Mr. Miller is not your grandfather. He's not related to you at all." Lucy's chin lifted with surprising stubbornness. "He is too my grandpa. He reads me stories and teaches me things and loves me. That's what grandpas do." "Lucy," Maria said gently, but Lucy was not to be deterred. "And we're a good family," she continued earnestly. "We say prayers and help our neighbors and work hard. Grandpa Ezra was very lonely before we came, and now he smiles all the time. That's good, right?" The question was directed at Bishop Moses, and Ezra watched the older man's face carefully. He had known Moses for decades, had seen him navigate complex community issues with wisdom and compassion. Now he waited to see which would prevail, strict adherence to tradition or recognition of love's transformative power. "Yes, child," Bishop Moses said finally, his voice gentler than before. "That is good." Elder Lapp leaned forward in his chair. "Bishop, surely we can't encourage this kind of arrangement. What precedent does it set? What happens when other members of the community decide to take in English families?" "What happens," Bishop Moses replied slowly, "is that we follow Christ's example of loving our neighbors as ourselves. But the appearance of impropriety—" "What impropriety?" Ezra interrupted, his patience finally wearing thin. "I'm a 73-year-old widower who has opened his home to a family in need. Tom works hard. Maria keeps house. Lucy brings joy to these old walls. Where is the impropriety in that?" "The community has standards," Elder Lapp insisted. "Expectations about how our members should live. Our community also has a tradition of caring for those in need, Ezra replied firmly. Of barn raisings and shared harvests and neighbors helping neighbors. This family needed help, and I was able to provide it. How is that different from any other act of Christian charity? Bishop Moses was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around him, the defensive pride in Tom's expression, the quiet dignity in Maria's bearing, the innocent love shining from Lucy's eyes, and the peaceful contentment that had replaced the haunted grief in Ezra's face. "Tell me, Ezra," he said finally, "how do you see this arrangement working in the long term? Are the Brennans planning to join our church? Will they adopt our ways of living?" It was the question Ezra had been dreading, because it exposed the complexity of their situation. They were building something new, something that didn't fit neatly into existing categories. "We're learning from each other," he said carefully. "And Tom and Maria respect our ways, and I'm learning from theirs. Lucy attends our school and is learning our values. We may not all dress plain or follow every tradition, but we share the same fundamental beliefs about faith, family, and community." "That's not the same as conversion," Elder Lapp pointed out. "No," Ezra agreed. "It's not, but it's not meant to be. We're not trying to change each other. We're trying to build a life together that honors what's best in both our traditions." Lucy, who had been listening to this exchange with growing concern, suddenly stepped forward and took Bishop Moses's weathered hand in her small one. "Mr. Bishop," she said seriously, "are you going to make us leave?" The direct question from the child seemed to cut through all the theological and social complexity to the heart of the matter. Bishop Moses looked down at this young girl who had somehow found her way into the center of their community's life, and his expression softened completely. "No, child," he said gently. "No one is going to make you leave." Elder Lapp started to protest, but Bishop Moses raised a hand for silence. "This family has brought new life to our community," he continued, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "They work hard, they live righteously, they contribute to the common good. If Ezra chooses to share his home and his life with them, that is his decision to make." The relief in the room was palpable. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Tom's shoulders relaxed for the first time since the visitors had arrived, and Lucy beamed with the satisfaction of having her family officially approved. "However," Bishop Moses continued, and everyone tensed again, "this arrangement must be conducted with wisdom and discretion. The community will be watching, and you must give them no cause for concern about your conduct or your commitment to our shared values." "Understood," Ezra replied solemnly. As the church leaders prepared to leave, Bishop Moses pulled Ezra aside for a private word. "You look happier than I've seen you since Sarah's passing," he observed quietly. "I am happier," Ezra admitted. "This family has given me purpose again, something to live for beyond my own grief." "Sarah would have approved," Bishop Moses said with certainty. "She always said your house needed the sound of children's laughter." After the visitors had gone, the family gathered on the front porch to watch the sunset, as had become their evening tradition. Lucy sat on Ezra's lap, her drawing from that morning carefully smoothed and placed on the table beside them. "So we can really stay?" she asked, needing to hear it one more time. "We can really stay," Ezra confirmed, "for as long as we all want to be together." Lucy nodded with satisfaction and snuggled closer against his chest. "Good, because Rex was worried about having to move again. He likes it here." Rex, hearing his name, opened one sleepy eye and thumped his tail against the porch floor, as if confirming Lucy's assessment. As the stars appeared overhead, Ezra felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected blessings that had come into his life. Lucy's drawing had forced them all to acknowledge what their hearts had already known. They were a family, bound not by blood or law, but by choice and love and the daily decision to care for each other. It was, he thought, exactly the kind of family that Sarah would have loved. 6 weeks into their life together, autumn had painted the Ohio countryside in brilliant reds and golds, and the Brennan-Miller household had settled into the kind of comfortable routine that felt as natural as breathing. But it was the approaching milestone of Lucy's 8th birthday that would test the bonds they'd been carefully building. The first sign of trouble came when Maria found Lucy sitting by the upstairs window, staring out at the golden fields with an expression far too melancholy for a child anticipating her birthday. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Maria asked, settling beside her daughter on the window seat. "Nothing," Lucy said in the way that meant everything was wrong. "Lucy Brennan, I know. That face. Tell me what's bothering you." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, then said in a small voice, "Jamie Miller at school said her birthday party had a bouncy house and a clown and 20 kids, and Sarah Yoder had a pony ride at hers." Maria's heart sank. In their relief at finding stability and community acceptance, she and Tom had lost sight of the fact that Lucy was still a little girl who noticed how her life compared to her classmates' lives. "Honey, you know we don't have money for parties like that right now," Maria said gently. "I know," Lucy replied, and the resignation in her voice was heartbreaking. "I wasn't asking for a pony or anything. I just thought maybe we could have cake. Store-bought cake like other kids get." The request was so modest, so reasonable, that Maria felt tears sting her eyes. Her daughter wasn't asking for extravagance, she was asking for normal, for the small celebrations that marked childhood, milestones in ways that made children feel special and loved. "Of course we can have cake," Maria said firmly. "We'll figure something out." But later, as she discussed it with Tom while they folded laundry in their upstairs bedroom, the harsh realities of their situation became clear. "We've got 37 $37 left from my last paycheck," Tom said, his voice tight with frustration. "After we buy groceries and put gas in the truck, there won't be enough for a birthday cake, let alone presents." "We could make a cake," Maria suggested. "From scratch. It would be just as good." "Would it, though?" Tom asked, and the pain in his voice reflected his own feelings of inadequacy. "Or would it just be another reminder that we can't give a daughter the things other kids take for granted?" Maria set down the shirt she'd been folding and looked at her husband, this good man who worked so hard to provide for them, who carried the weight of their financial struggles like stones in his pockets. "Tom, Lucy doesn't need store-bought cake to know she's loved." "But she wants it," Tom replied. "She's 8 years old, Maria. She should be able to have what she wants on her birthday, within reason, and a damn cake from the grocery store should be within reason for any father worth his salt." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on their door. Ezra's voice came through the wood, careful and respectful as always of their privacy. "Maria, Tom, could I speak with you both for a moment?" They exchanged glances, both wondering if he'd overheard their discussion. Tom opened the door to find Ezra standing in the hallway, his expression thoughtful. "I was wondering," Ezra said without preamble, "if you might help me with something. I've been thinking about Lucy's birthday, and I'd like to do something special for her, but I'm not sure what would be appropriate for an 8-year-old girl." The admission was delivered with the humble uncertainty of a man who had never had children of his own, but desperately wanted to do right by this child who had claimed his heart. Tom and Maria were quiet for a moment, processing both Ezra's offer and their own complex feelings about accepting help. "Mr. Miller," Maria said carefully, "that's very kind of you, but we can handle Lucy's birthday." "I'm sure you can," Ezra replied gently, "but I'd like to contribute if you'll let me. She's brought so much joy into this house, into my life. I'd like to give her something that shows how much she means to me." Tom's jaw tightened with the familiar struggle between gratitude and pride. "We appreciate the offer, but what did you have in mind?" Maria interrupted, earning a sharp look from her husband. Ezra's face brightened with the enthusiasm of someone who had clearly been planning this for a while. "Well, I thought we could have a proper birthday celebration. Not just cake and presents, but something that brings the whole community together. Sarah always said that birthdays should be shared with people who love you." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a list written in his careful script. I was thinking we could invite some of the neighbors, maybe the families from Lucy's school. Have it here in the afternoon. I could arrange for some traditional games, the kind we played when I was young. And Maria, if you're willing, we could combine your family's birthday traditions with some of ours. The thoughtfulness of his planning was evident in every detail he'd considered. He'd clearly put real time and effort into imagining how to make Lucy's day special. And for presents, Ezra continued, his voice growing softer, I've been working on something in the barn, a project I think she might like. Maria felt her resistance crumbling in the face of this man's obvious love for her daughter. But she could see Tom still struggling with the implications of accepting such generosity. Mr. Miller, Tom said finally, we can't let you pay for our daughter's birthday party. You're not letting me pay for it, Ezra corrected gently. You're letting me celebrate my granddaughter's birthday with her. The word hung in the air between them. Granddaughter. It was the first time Ezra had claimed that relationship openly, and the impact was immediate and profound. Is that how you see her? Maria asked softly. As your granddaughter. That's how she sees herself, Ezra replied. And yes, that's how I see her too. She's family, Maria. You all are, and family. 2 months into their new life together, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Tom was preparing to leave for work. Maria was packing Lucy's lunch for school, and Ezra was feeding the chickens in the yard when the mail truck rumbled up their drive. Rex barked once to announce the visitor, then settled back into his morning routine of following Lucy around the kitchen while she ate her breakfast and chattered about the spelling test she was confident she would ace. The letter that would change everything was mixed in with the usual assortment of bills and advertisements, a thick envelope bearing the logo of Midwest Insurance Associates and addressed to Thomas and Maria Brennan, current residents. Maria accepted the mail from the postal worker with a distracted smile, her attention focused on getting Lucy ready for school and Tom out the door with his lunch and tools. It wasn't until after the morning bustle had subsided, when Lucy was on the school bus and Tom was heading to the construction site, that she really looked at the insurance letter. The return address made her stomach clench with anxiety. This was the company that had been handling their claim from the flood, the one that had been promising a settlement for months while their old life remained buried under bureaucratic delays and claim adjustments. She was still staring at the envelope when Ezra came back from the barn, his hands dusty from his morning chores, his expression cheerful until he saw her face. Bad news? He asked gently. I don't know yet, Maria replied, turning the envelope over in her hands. It's from our insurance company. About the flood claim. They had spoken little about the insurance settlement in recent weeks. The initial excitement of potentially receiving enough money to start over had faded as months passed without resolution. Maria and Tom had begun to think of their life here as permanent, their future tied to this house and this family they'd built with. Ezra, would you like me to be here when you open it? Ezra asked. Maria nodded gratefully. Please. They sat at the kitchen table where they had shared so many meals, so many conversations about their shared future. Rex positioned himself between them, his canine intuition sensing the tension in the air. With trembling fingers, Maria opened the envelope and pulled out the official documents inside. The first page was a formal letter from the claims department, filled with legal language and reference numbers. But the number at the bottom of the page made her gasp audibly. What is it? Ezra asked, leaning forward with concern. The settlement, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. They're offering us $38,000. The amount hung between them like a thunderclap. $38,000, more money than the Brennan family had ever had at one time. Enough to start completely over wherever they chose to go. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. That's wonderful news, Maria. You and Tom will be able to make a fresh start. But Maria's expression wasn't joyful. It was stricken. Ezra, we can't... this changes everything. How so? Maria spread the documents on the table, her hands shaking slightly. "Read this part," she said, pointing to a section of fine print. "It says the settlement is contingent on our signing a release that states we were adequately housed and suffered no additional hardship due to displacement." Ezra read the section carefully, his lawyer's understanding of legal language serving him well. "They're saying that because you found shelter, you can't claim additional damages for being homeless." "Right, but there's more." Maria flipped to the second page, her voice growing more distressed. "They're also saying that since we're no longer in immediate need of emergency housing, the settlement must be used to establish permanent independent residence within 60 days of acceptance." The implications hit them both simultaneously. The insurance company wasn't just giving them money. They were requiring the family to leave, to use the settlement to establish their own household somewhere else. "They can't force you to move," Ezra said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Can't they?" Maria asked, reading further into the documents. "Look at this clause. It says that continued acceptance of charitable housing while possessing sufficient funds for independent living could constitute fraud." Ezra felt a chill run down his spine. The insurance company was essentially saying that once the Brennans received their settlement, staying in his house would be viewed as taking charity they no longer needed. The sound of Tom's truck in the driveway interrupted their shocked silence. He had forgotten his safety glasses and come back to retrieve them, but one look at Maria's face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his voice immediately tense with concern. Maria wordlessly handed him the insurance documents. Tom read them quickly, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. "Son of a—" he started, then caught himself glancing toward the school bus stop, where other children might hear his language. "Tom," Maria said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Tom sank into a chair, the weight of this unexpected development crushing the happiness they'd built over the past 2 months. "I don't know. I honestly don't know." "There's something else," Ezra said reluctantly. "Something I discovered yesterday when I was reviewing the property documents." He retrieved a folder from the kitchen counter and spread additional papers on the table. "I had the property reassessed for tax purposes, and there's been a significant development." Tom and Maria waited, sensing that more complications were coming. "The house is now valued at $17,000. Ezra continued. "With all the improvements you've made, Tom, and the increased property values in the area since the flood recovery began, the county made a substantial error in their original assessment." "What kind of error?" Tom asked warily. "The kind that could be challenged in court," Ezra replied. "Other buyers could claim the sale was fraudulent, that the county didn't properly advertise the true value of the property. They could force a new auction." Maria felt the room spinning around her. "So you could lose the house?" "It's possible," Ezra admitted. "There's already been one inquiry from a development company. They're buying up flood-damaged properties throughout the valley, renovating them and selling them for substantial profits." Tom ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar to both Maria and Ezra when he was processing overwhelming stress. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "We get $38,000, but we have to leave here within 60 days. And even if we wanted to stay, Ezra might lose the house anyway to some development company. That's the situation." "Yes," Ezra confirmed. Rex, who had been lying quietly between them, suddenly stood and walked to each person in turn, pressing his warm body against their legs as if offering comfort. Even the dog seemed to sense that their carefully constructed world was under threat. Maria looked around the kitchen that had become the heart of their family life, at the recipe cards still spread on the counter from their last cooking experiment, at Lucy's artwork hanging on the refrigerator, at the mason jars filled with late-season flowers from their garden. "There has to be something we can do," she said desperately. "Some way to fight this." "We could refuse the insurance settlement," Tom suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "And then what?" Maria asked. "We stay here with no money, No security, completely dependent on Ezra's generosity while he's fighting his own legal battle to keep the house. Or, Ezra said quietly, there might be another option. Both Tom and Maria looked at him hopefully. We could make this arrangement legal and permanent, a formal partnership that would satisfy the insurance requirements and protect us all from future challenges. What kind of partnership? Tom asked. Ezra had clearly been thinking about this since discovering the property value issue. A family business arrangement. I transfer part ownership of the property to you in exchange for your labor and investment in improvements. That makes you legitimate co-owners, not charity recipients. Maria's eyes widened. You would do that? Give us part of your house? Not give, Ezra corrected. Share, create something that protects all of us and makes this arrangement sustainable for the long term. Tom was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications. Ezra, that would be incredibly generous, but we can't ask you to... You're not asking, Ezra interrupted firmly. I'm offering, because in the past 2 months you've given me something worth far more than property. You've given me a family. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the school bus bringing Lucy home for lunch, a special privilege she had on Tuesdays. Her cheerful voice could be heard before she even reached the front door. I got 100 on my spelling test, she announced, bursting into the kitchen with Rex immediately at her heels. And Teacher Mary said I could read my story to the younger kids tomorrow. She stopped short when she saw the serious faces of the adults and the official-looking papers spread across the table. What's wrong? She asked, her joy immediately replaced by the kind of concern that children who had experienced instability learned to recognize too early. Maria and Tom exchanged glances, neither sure how to explain this complex situation to their 8-year-old daughter. There are some grown-up things we need to figure out, sweetheart, Maria said carefully. Are we going to have to move again? Lucy asked, and the fear in her voice was heartbreaking. We don't know yet, Tom replied honestly. Some things have happened that we need to work through. Lucy looked around the kitchen, her kitchen, where she helped make breakfast every morning and did her homework every afternoon. Then she walked over to Ezra and climbed onto his lap with the natural trust she had always shown him. Grandpa Ezra, she said seriously, are people trying to take our house away? Ezra felt his throat tighten with emotion. This child had already lost one home, had already experienced the fear and uncertainty of not knowing where she would sleep at night. The thought of putting her through that again was unbearable. Some people think we might not be able to stay here together, he said, gently, but we're going to figure out a way to make sure our family stays together. Promise? Lucy asked, with the intensity that only children could bring to requests for certainty in an uncertain world. Ezra looked at Tom and Maria, saw the hope and desperation in their faces, and felt something steel inside his chest. This family had brought more joy into his life than he had thought possible after Sarah's death. The thought of losing them, of returning to the silence and solitude of grief, was unacceptable. I promise, he said firmly. Whatever it takes, we're going to find a way to stay together. Lucy smiled with satisfaction and hugged him tightly. Good, because Rex really likes it here, and he gets sad when we have to move. As if on cue, Rex walked over and placed his large head on Ezra's knee, his amber eyes seeming to echo Lucy's sentiment about the importance of staying together. That evening, after Lucy had been tucked into bed with her dollhouse nearby and stories read, the 3 adults gathered again around the kitchen table to face the reality of their situation. The insurance settlement letter lay before them like a challenge, its legal language and requirements threatening to destroy the life they had built together. But beside it now lay other documents, property deeds, partnership agreements, legal forms that Ezra had been researching all afternoon. There's a way, he said quietly. It's complicated, and it will require all of us to commit fully to this family we've created, but there's a way to make this work. Tom and Maria leaned forward, ready to hear any option that might allow them to stay together. We form a legal family partnership, Ezra explained. You use part of your insurance settlement to buy into the property as co-owners. That satisfies the insurance requirement for independent housing while giving you permanent legal status here. How much of the settlement would that require? Maria asked. $15,000, Ezra replied. Which would leave you with $23,000 to invest in your own future, Tom's carpentry business, Maria's sewing work, Lucy's education fund. Tom was quiet for a long moment. And in return, you become legal partners in the property, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. We share expenses, share profits if we ever sell, share the work of maintaining and improving the place. But most importantly, Ezra continued, his voice growing softer, we become a legal family unit that no insurance company or development corporation can separate. Maria felt tears running down her cheeks. You would really do that? Make us equal? Partners? More than partners, Ezra corrected. Family, legal, documented, permanent family. As they sat in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, the three adults made a decision that would change everything. They would fight for their family, protect what they had created, and build something that could weather any challenge the outside world might bring. The insurance settlement letter was no longer a threat. It had become the foundation for their future together. The weeks following their decision to form a legal family partnership were filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety that permeated every aspect of their daily life. While they worked toward making their arrangement official, the outside pressures continued to mount, testing their resolve and forcing them to confront just how much they were willing to sacrifice to stay together. The first challenge came from an unexpected source. 3 days after they had signed the preliminary partnership papers, Lucy developed a severe case of pneumonia that landed her in the county hospital for a week. The illness struck suddenly and viciously, transforming their bright, energetic child into a pale, struggling patient who fought for every breath. Maria never left Lucy's bedside, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair and maintaining a vigil that spoke of a mother's fierce determination to will her child back to health. Tom split his time between the hospital and work, trying to maintain the income they desperately needed while supporting his wife and daughter through the crisis. But it was Ezra's response to the emergency that revealed the true depth of their family bonds. I'm staying too, he announced on the first night, appearing in Lucy's hospital room with a small overnight bag and the kind of quiet determination that brooked no argument. Mr. Miller, you don't need to, Maria began, but Ezra cut her off. With a gentle but firm gesture, she's my granddaughter, he said simply, and grandfathers don't leave when their grandchildren are sick. For 6 days and nights, he maintained his own vigil in the hospital waiting room, dozing fitfully in plastic chairs and surviving on vending machine coffee and the casseroles that neighbor women brought when word of Lucy's illness spread through. The community, Rex, who had been left in the care of their neighbor Rebecca Yoder, somehow escaped and appeared at the hospital on the 3rd day, having apparently walked the 8 miles from the farm. Hospital policy prohibited dogs inside, but no one had the heart to turn away the German shepherd who sat patiently outside the main entrance, waiting for news of his beloved Lucy. It was during this hospital vigil that Ezra made a discovery that would change everything about their legal situation. Unable to sleep, he had been going through the paperwork he'd brought with him, trying to finalize the details of their partnership agreement, when he found a bundle of letters tucked inside the folder of property documents. The letters were old, tied with a faded blue ribbon, and addressed to my dearest Ezra in handwriting he recognized immediately as Sarah's. He had never seen these particular letters before, and the dates indicated they were from early in their marriage, during a period when Sarah had gone to care for her ailing mother in Pennsylvania for several months. With trembling hands, he opened the first letter, and Sarah's voice seemed to speak to him across the decades. My beloved husband, I know this separation is difficult for both of us, but I have learned something important during my time here. Mother has been telling Me about the early days of her marriage to Papa, about how the community initially disapproved of their union because she was from a different church district. She said the hardest thing wasn't the disapproval itself, but the way it made her question whether she truly belonged. I find myself thinking about this as I watch you struggle with your own sense of belonging in our community. I know that some of the elders have expressed concerns about your past, about the fact that you joined our faith as an adult rather than being born into it. But I want you to know that belonging isn't about blood or birthright. It's about choice and love and the daily decision to care for each other. You belong with me, Ezra Miller, and I belong with you. Whatever the community says, whatever challenges we face, we belong together. And someday, when God sees fit to bless us with children, they will belong with us too, not because of blood or law, but because love makes families in ways that transcend all other bonds. Ezra read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face as he absorbed the profound similarity between Sarah's experience and the situation he now faced with the Brennan family. His own beloved wife had once been questioned about her belonging, had faced community disapproval, had struggled with the same issues of acceptance and legitimacy that now challenged their unconventional family. The second letter was even more revealing. Ezra, darling, I had the most wonderful conversation with Mrs. Henderson today. She's the English woman who lives down the road from Mother, the one with the 3 adopted children. She told me that when people questioned her about taking in children who weren't really hers, she would tell them that the heart doesn't understand the difference between biological and chosen family. Love is love, she said, and family is family. I keep thinking about what she said, and I realize that you and I have chosen each other every day of our marriage. We choose to love, choose to stay, choose to build something together. That choosing is what makes us family, not just the vows we spoke on our wedding day. The letters continued in this vein, full of Sarah's gentle wisdom about love, family, and belonging. But it was the final letter that contained the revelation that would change everything. My dearest Ezra, I have wonderful news. Mother's neighbor, Mr. Jameson, is a lawyer, and he has offered to help us with something very special. You know how we have always hoped for children, and how difficult it has been to accept that we may never be blessed in that way. But Mr. Jameson has told me about something called intended family designation that would allow us to legally claim any children who might come into our lives through adoption, marriage, or any other circumstance that brings young people into our household. He says it's an old legal principle that recognizes the reality that families are often formed by choice and circumstance rather than blood. If we file the proper papers, we could establish our household as one that is open to expanding through any means God provides. It would give legal protection to any children who might someday call us family, ensuring they would have inheritance rights and legal standing as our true children. I know this might seem premature, but something tells me we should prepare for the family God intends to give us, even if we don't yet know what form that family will take. Ezra stared at the letter in amazement. Sarah had researched and planned for the exact situation he now faced, decades before it came to pass. The intended family designation she mentioned was an old but still valid legal mechanism that could provide the framework they needed to make their partnership completely secure. He was still processing this discovery when Dr. Martinez appeared in the waiting room with the news they had all been praying for. Lucy's fever broke an hour ago, she announced with a tired but genuine smile. Her breathing has stabilized, and her chest x-rays show significant improvement. We'll want to keep her for observation for another day or 2, but she's going to be fine. The relief that flooded through Ezra was so intense it left him weak-kneed. He found himself sinking into a chair, Sarah's letters still clutched in his hands, overwhelmed by gratitude and the sense that his late wife had somehow reached across time to provide the guidance they needed. When he was finally allowed to see Lucy, She was sitting up in bed, pale but alert, with Maria holding one hand and Tom holding the other. Her face lit up when she saw Ezra. She saw, "Grandpa," she called weakly, "I was dreaming about you. You were reading me stories from the Bible, the ones about families who take care of each other." "Which stories, sweetheart?" Ezra asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "The one about Ruth and Naomi," Lucy said seriously. "About how Ruth told Naomi that her people would be her people and her God would be her God. Teacher Mary read it to us at school, and it made me think about us." The biblical reference hit Ezra like a revelation. The story of Ruth and Naomi was one of the most beautiful examples in Scripture of family formed by choice rather than blood, a young woman choosing to stay with her mother-in-law after her husband's death, declaring that nothing would separate them. "That's a very good story," Ezra said gently. "What did you think about it?" "I thought about how Ruth didn't have to stay with Naomi, but she chose to," Lucy replied. "Just like how we chose to be a family, and how God blessed them because they chose love instead of taking the easy way, out of the mouths of babes," Ezra thought, remembering Sarah's favorite phrase. This child, even in her illness, was seeing truths that the adults were still struggling to understand. That evening, as Lucy slept peacefully for the first time in a week, Ezra sat with Tom and Maria in the hospital cafeteria and shared his discovery. Of Sarah's letters, he read them passages about intended family designation, about love-making families, about the legal mechanisms that could protect their unconventional arrangement. "So Sarah was planning for this?" Maria asked in amazement. "Decades ago she was preparing for us." "She was preparing for whatever family God chose to bring into our lives," Ezra corrected gently. "She just understood better than I did that families come in many forms." Tom leaned back in his plastic chair, processing this new information. "What would this intended family designation mean for us practically?" "It would mean that Lucy would have the same legal standing as a biological grandchild," Ezra explained. "Inheritance rights, medical decision-making authority, educational guardianship, everything that grandparents typically have." "And for us?" Maria asked. "It would establish our family unit as legally recognized for all purposes. Insurance companies couldn't challenge our living arrangement. Development companies couldn't claim the property sale was fraudulent because we'd be a legitimate family business. And most importantly, no one could ever force us apart again." The implications were staggering. Sarah's foresight had provided them with a legal framework that could solve all their problems while honoring the reality of the love they had built together. 2 days later, they brought Lucy home from the hospital to a house that had been transformed by the community's support during her illness. Neighbor women had cleaned every surface, filled the refrigerator with prepared meals, and left fresh flowers in every room. The gesture spoke to their growing acceptance within the Amish community, recognition that this family belonged among them. Rex greeted Lucy's return with such enthusiasm that he nearly knocked her over, his tail wagging so hard his entire body vibrated with joy. He had clearly spent the week worrying about his young charge, and her return restored the natural order of his world. But the real surprise was waiting in Lucy's room. While she had been in the hospital, Tom had worked every evening to install special shelves for her dollhouse, creating an entire miniature world that reflected their real family life. The dollhouse now sat in a place of honor where Lucy could play with it from her bed, and Tom had added new furniture and tiny family members that looked remarkably like each of them. "There's even a little hospital," Lucy observed with delight, examining a miniature building that Tom had crafted with the same attention to detail that Ezra had brought to the original dollhouse. "And look, tiny Rex has a bandage on his paw, just like when he hurt himself protecting me from that snake." The dollhouse had become more than a toy. It was a chronicle of their family's journey, a tangible representation of their shared history and their commitment to each other. That evening, as they sat on the front porch for the first time in over a week, Ezra pulled out the legal documents he had been preparing based on Sarah's letters. The intended family designation forms were complex, but the lawyer he had consulted had confirmed that they were still valid and could provide exactly the legal protection they needed. "There's one more thing," he said as they reviewed the papers. "Something that Sarah wrote about that I think we should consider." He handed them a copy of Sarah's final letter, the one that outlined her vision for their future family. In it, she had written about creating a legacy that would extend beyond their own lives, a household that could provide stability and love for generations to come. "She wanted us to establish this place as a permanent family home," Ezra explained. "Not just for us, but for any future generations who might need what we've built here, Lucy's children and their children, and anyone else who might need a place to belong." The vision was breathtaking in its scope and generosity. Sarah had imagined their home as a lighthouse of sorts, a place where families could form and grow and find the stability that love could provide. "So we're not just solving our immediate problem," Maria said slowly. "We're creating something that could last forever." "That's the idea," Ezra confirmed. "A family that's bigger than any of us individually, strong enough to weather any challenge, and grounded in the kind of love that chooses to stay, even when leaving would be easier." As they signed the papers that would make their family legally binding, Rex settled contentedly at their feet. Lucy played quietly with her dollhouse nearby, and the stars appeared overhead like witnesses to the promise they were making to each other. They were no longer just people who had found each other by accident. They were a family by choice, protected by law, and blessed by a love that had been planted decades earlier by a woman who understood that the best families are those that choose each other every single day. The hearing was scheduled for a grey November morning when the last leaves clung stubbornly to the oak trees surrounding the county courthouse. Everything they had built together over the past 3 months would be decided in this sterile room, with fluorescent lighting and worn carpet, before a judge who knew nothing about the love that had transformed 4 strangers into a family. Ezra adjusted his tie for the 3rd time as they climbed the courthouse steps. He wore his best suit, the same black wool he had worn to Sarah's funeral, but today it felt like armor rather than mourning clothes. Beside him, Tom and Maria walked with the careful dignity of people who understood that their entire future hung in the balance. Lucy had wanted to come, but they had decided the courthouse was no place for an 8-year-old to wait while adults decided her fate. Instead, she was at school, where Teacher Mary had promised to let her help with the younger children during recess, a distraction that would keep her busy while the most important hearing of her young life took place. Rex, too, had been left. At home, though he had clearly sensed the gravity of the day and had whined mournfully as they drove away without him. The opposition was already assembled when they arrived at the courtroom. Representatives from the insurance companies sat at one table with their lawyers, their briefcases organized, and their expressions confident. At another table, lawyers for Midwest Development Corporation shuffled through papers that challenged the validity of Ezra's original property purchase. But the most painful presence in the courtroom was the small group of Amish community members who had come to observe the proceedings. Not all of them were hostile. Ezra could see Bishop Moses and Rebecca Yoder among the supporters, but there were others whose presence suggested they viewed this hearing as a test of whether their community would tolerate deviation from traditional family structures. Judge Patricia Hawkins entered promptly at 9 o'clock, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and her expression professionally neutral. She had a reputation for fairness, but also for strict adherence to legal precedent, which could work either for or against their unconventional arrangement. "This hearing," she began, settling behind the bench with practiced efficiency, "will address 3 interconnected issues: the validity of the property sale to Mr. Ezra Miller, the insurance settlement claim of the Brennan family, and the proposed family partnership arrangement between all parties." The insurance company's lawyer spoke first. a thin man named Davidson, who laid out their position with mechanical precision. Your Honor, the Brennan family filed a claim for displacement and emergency housing expenses following the flood that destroyed their rental property. However, they have been living in comfortable, stable housing for over 3 months without paying rent or contributing to household expenses. This constitutes fraudulent claim filing, as they have suffered no actual hardship beyond their initial displacement. Davidson presented documents and photographs meant to demonstrate that the Brennans had been living well beyond what emergency housing should provide. Pictures of Lucy's birthday party, of Maria working in the garden, of Tom making repairs to the house. All evidence, he argued, that this was not temporary emergency shelter, but a permanent living arrangement that negated their claim of ongoing displacement hardship. Furthermore, Davidson continued, the proposed family partnership is clearly a manufactured arrangement designed to circumvent legitimate insurance requirements. The timing alone, coming only after the settlement offer, demonstrates fraudulent intent. Ezra felt his jaw clench as this lawyer reduced their love and commitment to a matter of fraud and timing. Beside him, Tom's hands were clenched into fists, and Maria's face had gone pale with anxiety. The development company's lawyer was next, a woman named Richardson, who argued that the county's sale of the property to Ezra had been fundamentally flawed. Your Honor, our investigation has revealed that the property was sold for $100 when its actual value, even in flood-damaged condition, was approximately $8,000. The county failed to properly advertise the sale, failed to conduct adequate property assessment, and failed to follow their own procedures for disposing of tax-delinquent properties. Richardson presented evidence of other properties in the valley that had sold for fair market value, of assessment procedures that hadn't been followed, of legal requirements that had been ignored in the rush to clear flood-damaged properties from county books. Midwest Development Corporation was prepared to pay fair market value for this property, Your Honor. The current arrangement deprives taxpayers of legitimate revenue and rewards buyers who took advantage of administrative errors. When it was their turn to present their case, their lawyer, James Morrison, a soft-spoken man from the county seat who had helped them prepare the intended family designation paperwork, rose with the quiet confidence of someone who had built his career on protecting families rather than corporations. Your Honor, Morrison began, this case is fundamentally about family, love, and the legal recognition of bonds that transcend traditional categories. The Brennan family and Mr. Miller have created something that deserves protection under law, not dissolution by bureaucratic technicalities. He began with Ezra's testimony, leading him through the story of his grief after Sarah's death, his decision to purchase the flood-damaged property, and his discovery of the displaced family living there. Mr. Miller, Morrison asked, when you first found the Brennan family in your house, what was your reaction? I was surprised, Ezra replied honestly, but also, he paused, searching for the right words, also grateful. I had come there seeking solitude, but I found something better. I found purpose. How so? This family needed help, and I was able to provide it. But more than that, they gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. After my wife's death, I thought my life was essentially over. I was just waiting to join her. But Tom and Maria and Lucy, they gave me reasons to keep living, keep growing, keep loving. Morrison guided Ezra through the development of their relationship, the gradual evolution from temporary shelter to permanent family, the legal research that had led to the intended family designation. Mr. Miller, you've submitted documents indicating that your late wife had researched family designation laws decades ago. Can you explain the significance of this? Ezra pulled out Sarah's letters, his voice growing stronger as he read passages about love-making families, about choosing each other every day, about preparing for whatever family God might send their way. My wife understood something that it took me longer to learn, Ezra said. Family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about commitment, about choosing to care for each other through good times and bad. These letters show that Sarah was preparing for exactly this situation, decades before it occurred. When Morrison called Tom to testify, the younger man spoke with quiet dignity about his family's losses, their struggles, and their gradual realization that they had found not just shelter but home. Mr. Brennan, the insurance company, suggests that your living arrangement with Mr. Miller was designed to defraud them out of settlement money. How do you respond to that charge? Tom's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. That's insulting. And wrong. We didn't even know about the insurance settlement when we first started living with Ezra. We thought we'd lost everything and would never see a penny from that claim. Then why did you stay? Because we fell in love, Tom said simply. Not romantically, but with the life we were building together, with the family we'd become. My daughter has a grandfather now, someone who reads her stories and teaches her about plants and animals and treats her like she's precious. My wife has someone who understands her cooking, who shares stories about his own beloved wife, who makes her feel like her contributions matter. Tom's voice grew stronger as he continued. And I have something I never had growing up. A father figure who treats me with respect, who values my work, who includes me in decisions about our shared life. This isn't fraud, Your Honor. This is family. Maria's testimony was equally powerful, focusing on the stability and love that Ezra had brought into Lucy's life. Your Honor, my daughter has been displaced twice in her short life, once when we moved from Indiana for Tom's job, and again when the flood destroyed our home. She's known uncertainty and instability in ways no child should have to experience. Maria's voice grew emotional as she continued. But with Ezra, with Grandpa Ezra, she has security. She knows she's loved. She knows she belongs somewhere. She knows that someone will always be there to take care of her. That's not something you can put a price on. The most powerful moment came when Morrison presented the community petition, document that had been circulating through the Amish district for weeks, gathering signatures from neighbors who supported the family's right to stay together. Your Honor, this petition bears the signatures of 47 community members, including religious leaders, business owners, and neighbors who have observed this family's contribution to their community. They testify to the Brennan family's character, their integration into local life, and their positive impact on everyone around them. Morrison read selected statements from the petition. The Brennan family has brought new life to our community. Lucy's presence in our school has enriched our children's understanding of friendship and acceptance. Tom's craftsmanship has improved properties throughout the valley. Maria's kindness has created bridges between different parts of our community. Ezra Miller has found new purpose and joy through this family. The grief that was consuming him has been replaced by love and commitment that honor his late wife's memory while creating space for new blessings. This is what Christian love looks like in practice: strangers becoming family, different backgrounds uniting in common purpose, love transcending traditional boundaries to create something beautiful and lasting. As Morrison concluded their presentation, Ezra looked around the courtroom at the faces watching this legal drama unfold. Some showed skepticism, others showed support, but all seemed to recognize that they were witnessing something significant, a test of whether love could triumph over bureaucracy, whether families formed by choice deserved the same protection as families formed by blood. The judge called for a recess before hearing closing arguments, and during the break, Ezra was approached by Bishop Moses, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. "Ezra," the bishop said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever this court decides, your community supports you. We've seen the love you've built with this family, and we recognize it as blessed." The words meant more to Ezra than any legal victory could. His community, the people who had known him and Sarah for decades, had witnessed his transformation and declared it good. As they prepared to return to the courtroom for closing arguments, Tom placed a hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Whatever happens," Tom said quietly, "I want you to know that you've given us something we'll never forget. You've shown Lucy what a grandfather's love looks like. You've given Maria a sense of belonging, and you've taught me what it means to be part of a real family." "Thank you," Ezra replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep living." When Judge Hawkins returned to the bench for closing arguments, the courtroom fell silent. Everything they had built together, everything they hoped to become, would soon be decided by this one woman who held their future in her hands. The next hour would determine whether love truly was enough to create a family that the law would recognize and protect. Judge Hawkins returned to the bench with a folder of notes and the grave expression of someone who understood the weight of the decision she was about to render. The courtroom fell into absolute silence, broken only by the soft humming of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. "This case," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the small courtroom, "presents the court with questions that go beyond simple legal technicalities. We are asked to determine not just the validity of contracts and claims, but the very nature of family itself." Ezra felt his heart hammering in his chest as the judge reviewed the evidence that had been presented. Beside him, Tom and Maria sat perfectly still, their hands clasped tightly together. "Regarding the insurance settlement," Judge Hawkins continued, "the court finds that the Brennan family's claim was filed in good faith based on legitimate displacement and hardship. The fact that they subsequently found stable housing does not negate their initial losses or their right to compensation for those losses." Relief flooded through Maria's face, but Ezra knew this was only the first of several critical rulings. However, the judge continued, "The insurance company's concerns about the timing and nature of the family partnership arrangement are not without merit. The court must examine whether this partnership represents a legitimate family structure or a manufactured arrangement designed to circumvent insurance requirements." The judge paused, consulting her notes before continuing. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, including the remarkable letters from Mrs. Sarah Miller that predate this situation by decades, the court finds that this family partnership represents a genuine evolution of relationship rather than a fraudulent scheme. Ezra felt tears spring to his eyes. Sarah's foresight, her letters about intended family designation, had provided the legal foundation they needed. The intended family designation documentation, properly filed and legally binding, establishes Mr. Miller's household as one that was prepared to expand through non-traditional means. This was not a last-minute arrangement, but the culmination of decades of preparation and recent months of genuine family building. Judge Hawkins turned to the property ownership question, and the tension in the courtroom ratcheted higher. Regarding the challenge to Mr. Miller's property purchase, the court acknowledges that the county made errors in their assessment and sale procedures. The property was indeed undervalued and improperly advertised. Ezra's heart sank. This ruling could destroy everything regardless of the family designation. However, the judge continued, the court also finds that Mr. Miller purchased the property in good faith without knowledge of the assessment errors. He has invested considerable resources in improvements, and more importantly, the property has become the foundation for a legitimate family unit that serves the broader community interest. She paused, looking directly at the development company's lawyer. While Midwest Development Corporation may have been prepared to pay fair market value, they have failed to demonstrate how their development plans would serve the community interest better than the current family arrangement. The court has heard testimony from numerous community members about the positive impact of this family's presence. Therefore, Judge Hawkins announced, the court validates Mr. Miller's ownership of the property, with the caveat that he must pay the county the difference between what he paid and the property's assessed value at the time of sale. approximately $7,900. Tom and Maria exchanged worried glances. They had the insurance settlement money, but $7,900 was a substantial sum. Before anyone could react, Ezra spoke quietly to their lawyer, who then stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, Mr. Miller wishes to make a statement regarding the property value adjustment." "Proceed, Mr. Miller." Ezra rose, his 73-year-old frame straightening with dignity and purpose. "Your Honor, I accept the court's ruling regarding the property value. However, I wish to clarify how this payment will be handled. As part of our family partnership, Tom and Maria Brennan will be contributing $15,000 from their insurance settlement to purchase equal ownership in the property. This contribution more than covers the $7,900 adjustment and establishes their legal status as co-owners rather than dependents." The elegance of this solution was immediately apparent. The Brennans weren't accepting charity. They were becoming equal partners in a legitimate family business. Judge Hawkins nodded approvingly. That arrangement satisfies the court's requirements perfectly, but there was still one more critical issue to address. "Finally," the judge said, "the court must rule on the broader question of whether this family partnership deserves legal recognition and protection." She looked around the courtroom, her gaze taking in the Amish community members who had come to support the family, the insurance lawyers who had challenged their legitimacy, and the development company representatives who had tried to break them apart. "The law recognizes many forms of family," Judge Hawkins said, her voice growing stronger. "Adoption, marriage, guardianship, kinship care, all of these create legal family bonds between people who may not share blood relationships. The intended family designation that Mr. Miller and his late wife established decades ago represents another valid form of family creation." She pulled out a document that Ezra recognized as the new deed Morrison had prepared. "Therefore, the court hereby recognizes the Miller-Brennan family partnership as a legitimate family unit with all attendant legal rights and protections. Tom and Maria Brennan are granted equal ownership in the property and equal standing in all family decisions. Lucy Brennan is legally recognized as Ezra Miller's granddaughter with full inheritance and guardianship rights." The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. They had won, not just the individual battles over insurance and property, but the larger war over whether their love qualified as family in the eyes of the law. "Furthermore," Judge Hawkins continued, "this court directs the insurance company to honor the Brennan family's settlement claim in full without restrictions on their housing arrangements. Their partnership with Mr. Miller represents independent living, not continued dependence on charity." The insurance company lawyer started to object, but Judge Hawkins silenced him with a raised hand. "The court also orders that this family partnership be entered into the county records as a precedent-setting case for intended family designation. This ruling establishes that families formed by choice and love deserve the same legal protections as families formed by birth or traditional marriage." As the judge's gavel fell, the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from their supporters and frustrated discussions among the lawyers who had challenged them. But Ezra barely heard any of it. He was focused on the faces of Tom and Maria, on the tears of joy streaming down their cheeks, on the knowledge that they had fought for their family and won. Bishop Moses approached them as they gathered their papers and prepared to leave. "Ezra," he said solemnly, "this decision honors not just your family, but all families that are built on love and commitment. You have set a precedent that will help others in similar situations." Rebecca Yoder, who had been sitting beside her husband throughout the hearing, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Sarah would be so proud," she said simply, "so very proud of what you've built together." As they walked out of the courthouse into the gray November afternoon, Ezra felt a profound sense of completion. The legal battles were over, but more importantly, they had achieved something that transcended law. They had proven that love really could create family, that choice could be stronger than blood, that commitment could overcome any obstacle. Tom's first call was to Lucy's school, arranging to pick her up early, with news that would change her understanding of her place in the world. "What are you going to tell her?" Maria asked as they drove toward the school. "The truth," Tom replied, "that she's legally and officially part of a family that will never let her go, that will never make her wonder if she belongs." When they arrived at the school, Lucy was waiting by the classroom window, having somehow sensed that this was the day that would determine her future. She ran to them the moment they appeared, her young face anxious with hope and fear. "Did we win?" she asked breathlessly. "Can we stay together?" Ezra knelt down to her level, this precious child who had become the center of his world. "We won everything, sweetheart," he said gently. "You're officially my granddaughter now, and we're officially a real family that nobody can ever break apart." Lucy's whoop of joy echoed across the schoolyard, and she threw herself into Ezra's arms with such enthusiasm that she nearly knocked him over. "Rex is going to be so happy," she announced. "He was worried we might have to move again." As they drove home together, home to the farmhouse that was now legally and officially theirs, all of theirs, Ezra felt Sarah's presence in the car with them. She had planned for this day decades earlier, had prepared the legal framework that made their victory possible, had understood that love sometimes needed law to protect it from those who couldn't see its value. The new deed in his pocket bore 4 names: Ezra Miller, Thomas Brennan, Maria Brennan, and Lucy Brennan Miller. It was a document that told the story of strangers who became family, of love that conquered bureaucracy, of belonging that transcended every traditional boundary. When they reached the farmhouse, Rex was waiting in the yard, his tail wagging, as if he somehow knew that this homecoming was different from all the others. This time, they weren't just returning to a place they lived. They were coming home to a place they owned together, a place where they belonged by right as well as by love. The new family portrait they would have taken to replace Sarah's solo wedding photo would show 4 people and a dog standing in front of a house that had been transformed from a bargain purchase into the foundation of something that would last for generations. They had fought for their family and won, creating a legacy that would endure long after any of them were gone. 6 months after the courthouse victory, spring had returned to the Ohio Valley with a gentleness that seemed to bless everything it touched. The farmhouse that had once been a $100 bargain now stood as testament to what love and hard work could accomplish when given the chance to flourish. Ezra stood on the front porch in the early morning light, watching Tom work in the expanded garden, while Maria hung laundry on the line that stretched between 2 maple trees Tom had planted. In February, Lucy's laughter carried across the yard as she played with Rex, who had appointed himself the official supervisor of all outdoor activities. The changes to the property were remarkable, but not ostentatious. Tom's carpentry skills had transformed the flood-damaged house into something that felt both sturdy and welcoming. New shutters, framed windows that sparkled with Maria's attention to detail. The wraparound porch had been extended and reinforced, creating space for the family conversations that had become their evening tradition. But the most significant changes weren't visible to casual observers. They lived in the rhythm of a household that had found its balance in the easy domesticity of people who had stopped being careful with each other and had learned to simply be family. "Grandpa Ezra!" Lucy called from the garden, where she was helping Tom plant tomatoes in the raised beds they had built together. "Come see how many seeds we planted." At 9 years old now, Lucy had grown taller and more confident, but she still possessed the joyful curiosity that had first captured Ezra's heart. Her birthday dollhouse had been joined by other treasures: books from the school library, art supplies for the drawings that covered the refrigerator, and a collection of smooth stones that Rex helped her find during their walks around the property. "I'll be right there," Ezra called back, but he took a moment longer to absorb the scene before him. Sarah's presence seemed especially strong on mornings like this, when the house hummed with the life she had always dreamed it would contain. The legal victories had given them security, but it was the small daily moments that had given them joy. Maria's cooking experiments that blended Amish traditions with her own family recipes, Tom's woodworking projects that improved both function and beauty throughout the house, Lucy's bedtime stories that often featured adventures of the miniature family in her dollhouse, tales that paralleled their own journey from strangers to loved ones. The insurance settlement had been paid in full, allowing them to invest in improvements that increased both the property's value and their quality of life. Tom's carpentry business, operated from the barn that Ezra had helped him convert into a workshop, was thriving as word spread about his skill and reliability. Maria's sewing work had evolved into something she had never expected. A small but growing business, creating quilts and clothing for both Amish and English customers. Her designs, which incorporated elements from both traditions, had become sought after at local markets and craft fairs. But perhaps the most meaningful change was visible in Ezra himself. The haunted grief that had shadowed his features for months, after Sarah's death, had been replaced by something that could only be described as contentment. He moved with purpose now, woke each morning with things to anticipate, fell asleep each night surrounded by the comfortable sounds of a household. At peace. "The mail's here," Maria announced, emerging from the house with an envelope that bore official-looking letterhead. "It's from the State Family Services Department." They had been expecting this letter, the final piece of paperwork that would complete Lucy's legal adoption as Ezra's granddaughter. The intended family designation had provided immediate protection, but the formal adoption would ensure that their family structure was recognized in all legal contexts. Ezra opened the envelope, with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the magnitude of what this document represented. Inside was a certificate that officially recognized Lucy Brennan Miller as his legally adopted granddaughter, with all the rights and privileges that relationship entailed. "It's official," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "Lucy is legally and permanently my granddaughter." The celebration that followed was typically understated but deeply meaningful. Lucy hugged each adult in turn, Rex wagged his approval, and Maria wiped away tears that spoke of gratitude too deep for words. Later that afternoon, Ezra found himself in Sarah's garden, the flower beds she had tended for 45 years and that he had maintained as a memorial to her memory. He often came here when he needed to feel close to her, when he wanted to share news or seek guidance for decisions that seemed too important to make alone. "She would have loved them, wouldn't she?" he said aloud to the headstone that marked Sarah's resting place in the small family cemetery at the edge of their property. The stone was simple, bearing only her name, the dates of her birth and death, and the words, "beloved wife and friend." But Ezra had recently added a small bench nearby, where he could sit and talk to her about the life that had grown around her absence. "Lucy has your curiosity about everything," he continued, settling onto the bench that Tom had built for him. "Always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things work. And Maria has your gift for making a house feel like a home. Tom reminds me of myself when I was younger, determined to provide for his family, willing to work as hard as necessary to build something lasting." The afternoon breeze rustled through the flowers that were beginning to bloom, and Ezra felt the familiar sense of Sarah's approval that came to him in moments like this. She had prepared the way for this family, had understood decades before. He did that love could create bonds stronger than blood. "The lawyer called today," he told her. "The precedent we set is already helping other families. 3 other intended family designation cases have been filed in the county, all referencing our court victory. You always said love should be protected by law, not just honored in hearts." As evening approached, the family gathered on the front porch for their traditional end-of-day conversation. Lucy brought her latest school project, a family tree that showed the complex but beautiful structure they had created together. At the top were Sarah and Ezra, followed by Tom and Maria on the next level, then Lucy at the bottom, with Rex drawn in as a loyal companion to them all. Teacher Mary said it was the most interesting family tree she'd ever seen, Lucy reported, proudly. She said it showed how families can grow in all different ways. What did you tell her about how we became a family? Maria asked. I told her the truth, Lucy replied, with the straightforward honesty that still characterized her approach to life. That Grandpa Ezra needed a family and we needed a grandpa, so God brought us together. And that sometimes the best things happen when you don't expect them. As the stars appeared overhead, Ezra felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with legal victories or property values, and everything to do with the knowledge that they had built something that would endure. The house that had been damaged by flood and purchased for $100 had become the foundation for a legacy that would last for generations. Maria's quilting projects now included pieces that told the story of their family, fabric collages that captured important moments like Lucy's first day at the Amish school, the birthday party that had brought the community together, the day they signed the papers that made them legally family. Rex, now fully established as the family's guardian, and Lucy's devoted companion, had claimed a permanent spot by the front door where he could monitor all comings and goings while staying close to the humans he had sworn to protect. You know what I want to do tomorrow? Lucy announced as they prepared to go inside for the night. What's that, sweetheart? Ezra asked. I want to take a new picture of our family, a real one, with a real camera, to replace the one I drew when I was little. Why? Tom asked with amusement. Because we're all different now, Lucy explained seriously. We're not just people who live together anymore. We're a real family with papers and everything, and I want to have a picture that shows how happy we are. The professional family portrait they had taken the following week would indeed replace Sarah's solo wedding photo on the mantelpiece. It showed 4 people and a German shepherd standing in front of a house that had been transformed by love and hard work into something beautiful and lasting, but more than that, it captured something in their faces that spoke of belonging, of security, of the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the people you're meant to love. Ezra kept a copy of that photograph in his wallet next to the new deed that bore all their names. Sometimes, when he was in town running errands or visiting with neighbors, people would ask about his family. He would pull out the photograph with quiet pride and explain how a 73-year-old widower had bought a flooded farmhouse for $100 and found the family he'd been waiting for his entire life. Sometimes, he would say, the best things in life come from the worst moments. You just have to be willing to choose love over fear and family over loneliness. The story of their unconventional family had spread throughout the county and beyond, inspiring others who found themselves in situations that didn't fit traditional categories. The legal precedent they had set continued to help families formed by choice rather than birth, proving that love really could conquer bureaucracy when it was backed by determination and legal wisdom. Years later, when Lucy had children of her own and brought them to visit the farmhouse where she had learned what family meant, she would tell them the story of how their great-grandfather Ezra had bought a broken house and found a treasure greater than any amount of money. The house still stood, still sheltered the family that had grown around the original miracle of strangers choosing to become loved ones. Rex's descendants continued to guard the property and love new generations of children. The garden still bloomed with flowers that honored Sarah's memory, while celebrating the life that had grown in the soil of her wisdom. And on quiet evenings, when the day's work was done, and the family gathered on the front porch to watch the sunset over the fields they had learned to call home, the presence of blessing was so strong that even skeptics would have had to admit that some stories are too beautiful to be anything but true. The farmhouse that had once been a bargain had become a legacy, Proof that when love is given the chance to grow, it can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities, creating ripples of hope and belonging that spread far beyond any single family's boundaries. Sometimes, the best investments are the ones that pay dividends in laughter, in security, in the knowledge that you belong somewhere and someone will always be glad you came home. That was the real treasure Ezra Miller had found when he bought a flooded farmhouse for $100 and discovered a family with a dog still living there. In the end, it turned out to be the best $100 he had ever spent.